A rifle shot shattered the morning air in Red Hollow, and everyone knew someone was about to die or someone was about to be saved. 18-year-old Eliza Hartwell was being dragged down Main Street toward a forced marriage, sold like livestock to pay her father's debts. The town watched in silence as her future was stolen, until a cowboy raised his Winchester and changed everything. What happened next would be remembered for generations. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The dust rose in small clouds with each reluctant step Eliza took down Main Street. Her cream-colored dress, the one her mother had sewn for her 16th birthday, before the fever took her, was already stained brown at the hem, dragged through the Colorado dirt like everything else beautiful in her life. Her father's hand gripped her upper arm so tightly she could feel each of his fingers as individual points of pain, bruises already forming beneath the fabric of her sleeve. "Keep walking," Thomas Hartwell hissed through teeth clenched around the stub of a cigar. His breath reeked of whiskey, though it was barely past 9 in the morning. "Don't you dare embarrass me more than you already have." Eliza wanted to laugh at that, at the bitter irony of it. She was the embarrassment? Not him, with his gambling debts and his broken promises and his willingness to sell his only daughter to the highest bidder. But she kept her mouth shut because she'd learned years ago that talking back to Thomas Hartwell only made things worse. The September sun beat down mercilessly on Red Hollow, turning the air thick and heavy. Eliza could feel sweat trickling down her spine, making her dress stick to her back. Or maybe that was fear. She couldn't tell anymore. The two sensations had become so intertwined over the past 3 weeks, ever since her father had come home drunk and triumphant, announcing that he'd solved all their problems by promising her hand to Silas Mackenzie. Silas Mackenzie. Even his name made her stomach turn. He was 43 years old, with gray threading through his dark hair and a reputation that stretched across 3 counties. He owned most of the land around Red Hollow, and what he didn't own, he controlled through debt and intimidation. He'd buried 2 wives already. The first died in childbirth along with the baby, and the second had fallen down the stairs during an argument about money, or so the story went. No one in Red Hollow believed it, but no one challenged it either. Silas Mackenzie was not a man you crossed if you wanted to keep breathing. And now, Eliza was being delivered to him like a package, wrapped in cream-colored cotton and tied with her father's desperation. Main Street stretched before her like a gauntlet. On both sides, the people of Red Hollow had gathered to watch. Some stood on the wooden sidewalks. Others leaned against the hitching posts or the support beams of the general store. She recognized most of them. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house, who used to slip Eliza extra biscuits when her father forgot to pay their tab. Old Samuel from the livery stable, who taught her to ride when she was just 8 years old. The Henderson twins, girls her own age who used to be her friends before their parents decided that associating with Thomas Hartwell's daughter might damage their family's standing. None of them met her eyes now. The church waited at the end of the street, its white painted boards stark against the blue sky. Reverend Michaels stood on the steps, his Bible clutched in his hands, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He would perform the ceremony because refusing would mean crossing Silas Mackenzie. And like everyone else in Red Hollow, the good Reverend valued his neck more than his principles. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Each step brought her closer to a future she couldn't escape. She'd tried. God knows she'd tried. 3 nights ago, she'd packed a small bag and attempted to slip out her bedroom window. Her father had been waiting in the darkness below, his belt already in his hand. The beating had been thorough enough to leave marks, but careful enough not to damage anything. Silas Mackenzie might consider his property. "Faster," her father growled, jerking her forward. Eliza stumbled, catching herself just before she fell. The sudden movement sent a sharp pain through her ribs, another reminder of her failed escape attempt. She pressed her free hand against her side and forced herself to keep walking. Silas Mackenzie emerged from the church, and Eliza's breath caught in her throat. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her father made in a year, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine. His face was weathered and hard, with deep lines carved around his mouth and eyes that held no warmth. As he watched her approach, his lips curved into something that might have been a smile on someone else, but on him looked like a predator baring its teeth. "There's my bride," he called out, his voice carrying down the street. Right on time, just as we agreed, Thomas. As promised, Silas, her father replied, his grip on Eliza's arm finally loosening slightly. The debt's cleared, then? All of it? Once the ceremony's complete, Silas descended the church steps, his eyes never leaving Eliza. Once she's legally mine. Mine. The word made Eliza's skin crawl. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, anything but submit to this fate. But what could she do? She was alone. She had no money, no allies, nowhere to run where her father or Silas couldn't find her. The law wouldn't help her. Women had few rights when it came to marriage contracts, especially when fathers and debts were involved. She was trapped, as surely as if she were already locked in Silas Mackenzie's house. She's a good girl, her father was saying, already negotiating the terms of her life as if she weren't standing right there. Knows how to cook and clean. Strong, healthy. She'll give you sons. I'm sure she will. Silas had reached them now, standing close enough that Eliza could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying that made her want to gag. He reached out and grabbed her chin, tilting her face up toward his. His fingers were cold despite the heat. Pretty little thing, isn't she? Those green eyes. I'll enjoy looking into those. Eliza jerked her head away, a spark of defiance flaring despite her fear. Don't touch me. Silas's expression darkened. Better teach her some manners before the wedding night, Thomas. She's just nervous, her father said quickly, shooting Eliza a warning glare. Aren't you, girl? Just wedding jitters. She'll settle down once. The crack of a rifle shot cut through his words like thunder through silence. Everyone froze. The sound echoed off the buildings, rolling down Main Street and out into the emptiness beyond town. Birds scattered from their roosts, and somewhere a horse whinnied nervously. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then, as one, every head turned toward the source of the sound. A man sat astride a buckskin horse at the far end of Main Street, his Winchester rifle raised toward the sky, smoke still curling from the barrel. He wore dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a dark shirt faded from too many washings, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Even from this distance, Eliza could see the set of his shoulders, straight and certain, the posture of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. What the hell? Silas started, but the cowboy was already moving. He lowered the rifle, resting it across his saddle, and urged his horse forward at a slow walk. The buckskin's hooves struck the dirt with a steady rhythm that somehow sounded louder than the panicked whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd. As he drew closer, Eliza could make out more details. The day's worth of stubble on his jaw, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his blue eyes seemed to take in everything with a single sweep. He looked about 30, maybe a few years older, with sun-weathered skin and the lean build of someone who spent more time in the saddle than in town. There was something in the way he carried himself that spoke of hard living and harder choices, but also of a core of steel that wouldn't bend easily. The cowboy stopped his horse about 20 feet from where Eliza stood between her father and Silas. He shifted in his saddle, and Eliza noticed how his hand rested casually on his thigh, close to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. It was a nice voice, Eliza thought distantly, deeper than her father's, steadier than Silas's. "Fine day for a wedding." "Who the hell are you?" Silas demanded, taking a step forward. "And what do you think you're doing, discharging a weapon in the middle of town?" "Name's Jonah Reed," the cowboy replied calmly, "and I fired into the air to get everyone's attention. Seemed like the kind of occasion that warranted an interruption." "You've got no business here, Reed," Thomas Hartwell snarled, though Eliza noticed he'd taken a step back rather than forward. "This is a private family matter." "Private?" Jonah Reed's eyes swept the crowd, then returned to Thomas. "You're marching this girl down Main Street with half the town watching. Doesn't seem very private to me." "It's none of your concern," Silas said coldly. "Now ride on before you find yourself in trouble you can't handle." Instead of leaving, Jonah Reed dismounted. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, tying his horse's reins to the nearest hitching post before turning back to face them. The rifle remained in his hand, though he held it loosely, pointing at the ground. "Here's the thing," Jonah said, his tone conversational, but his eyes hard as flint. "I rode into Red Hollow about an hour ago looking for work. First thing I heard in the saloon was that Thomas Hartwell was forcing his daughter into marriage to pay off gambling debts. That true? That's none of your goddamn business, Thomas spat. I'm making it my business. Jonah's gaze shifted to Eliza, and for the first time since her father had grabbed her arm that morning, she felt like someone was actually seeing her, not as property, not as a debt payment, but as a person. Miss, do you want to marry Silas Mackenzie? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Eliza's heart stuttered. No one had asked her that. Not her father, not the reverend, not a single person in this entire cursed town. They'd all just assumed her consent didn't matter, that her wants were irrelevant compared to debts and deals made between men. Don't answer that, her father hissed, tightening his grip on her arm again. You stay quiet, girl. I believe I asked her, Jonah said mildly, but there was steel underneath the words. Not you. Silas stepped between them, his hand moving to rest on his own sidearm. You're making a big mistake, stranger. I own half this county. You think you can just ride in here and— I think a woman ought to have a say in who she marries, Jonah interrupted. Seems like a simple enough principle. Now, Miss Hartwell. He emphasized her name, reminding everyone present that she had an identity beyond girl or bride or debt payment. Do you want this marriage? Eliza opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The words were there, burning in her chest, desperate to be released. But 20 years of being told to be quiet, to be obedient, to submit to male authority, held her tongue prisoner. What would happen if she said no? Would it even matter? Would this stranger actually protect her, or would he just make things worse before riding off and leaving her to face the consequences? She wants it, Thomas declared. She's just shy. Now get out of here before— No! The word burst from Eliza's throat like a bullet from a chamber, small but devastating. No, I don't want this marriage. I don't want any of this. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Thomas's face went purple with rage. You ungrateful little— There's your answer, Jonah said calmly, cutting him off. The lady doesn't consent. No marriage. It doesn't work that way, Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet. Thomas owes me $10,000. We had an agreement. His daughter, for the debt. That's a legal contract. You can't sell people, Jonah replied. Last I checked, slavery got abolished a few years back. This isn't slavery. It's marriage. Perfectly legal. Coerced marriage isn't legal. It's kidnapping. Jonah shifted his stance slightly, and Eliza noticed how the movement put him between her and both Silas and her father. And I don't think the territorial judge would look kindly on a man who buys women to pay debts. You threatening me? Silas's hand tightened on his gun. I'm observing the law. Jonah's voice remained steady, but Eliza saw his jaw tighten. Now, seems to me you've got two choices here. You can let Miss Hartwell go, and Thomas can work off his debt like any honest man. Or what? Silas laughed, harsh and cold. You think you can shoot your way out of this? There's 50 people here, and half of them work for me. You draw that gun, you're a dead man. Maybe, Jonah acknowledged, but I guarantee you'll be dead too. And your friend Thomas there, and probably a few others before they bring me down. Now, is this girl worth all those deaths? Worth your death? The question seemed to echo through the street. Eliza held her breath, waiting. She could feel the tension like a physical thing crackling in the air between these men. One wrong move, one wrong word, and this would explode into violence. Silas studied Jonah for a long moment, his dark eyes calculating. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. You've got balls, Reed. I'll give you that. But you're not thinking this through. Even if you somehow get out of town alive with the girl, where are you going to go? I've got resources. I've got men. I'll find you. And when I do, I'll make sure you die slow. And I'll still take what's mine. She's not yours, Jonah said quietly. And she never will be. Thomas, Silas said, turning to Eliza's father, you better control your daughter, or our deal is off. You'll have every creditor in 3 counties coming for you. They'll take your house, your land, everything. Is that what you want? Thomas's face twisted with indecision and fear. Eliza could see him weighing his options, calculating the costs. For a brief, painful moment, she allowed herself to hope that her father might choose her over his debts, that he might protect his daughter rather than his own worthless skin. That hope died when he spoke. "She's going through with the marriage," Thomas said firmly. "This stranger's got no right to interfere with family business." He grabbed Eliza's arm again, yanking her toward him. "Come on, girl, stop this nonsense." "No," Eliza said again, louder this time. She tried to pull free, but her father's grip was iron. "I won't do it. I won't." Thomas raised his hand to strike her. He never completed the motion. Jonah moved faster than Eliza would have thought possible, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. His hand caught Thomas's wrist in mid-swing, stopping it cold. "You don't touch her." "Get your hands off me!" Thomas tried to jerk free, but Jonah's grip didn't budge. "Let her go," Jonah said, his voice soft but absolutely unyielding. "Now." For a moment, father and stranger locked eyes. Then Thomas released Eliza's arm, and Jonah let go of his wrist. They stepped apart, both breathing hard, tension radiating from their bodies. "You're making a mistake," Silas warned, his hand still hovering near his gun. "A big one." Jonah turned to Eliza. "Miss Hartwell, I'm offering you a choice. You can go through with this marriage, try to make the best of a bad situation, or you can come with me. I'll take you somewhere safe, somewhere these men can't reach you. I can't promise it'll be easy, and I can't promise you won't face consequences. But I can promise that as long as I'm breathing, no one will force you into anything against your will." Eliza stared at him. This stranger, this cowboy who'd appeared out of nowhere like something from a dime novel, was offering her a way out. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was probably impossible. It was the only real choice she'd been given in her entire life. "If you go with him," Thomas said urgently, grabbing her attention, "I'll disown you. You'll never be welcome in this town again. You'll have nothing. No family, no home, no prospects. Is that what you want?" "Better than being Silas Mackenzie's third wife," Eliza shot back, surprised by the venom in her own voice. Silas's face darkened. "You'll regret those words." "Maybe," Eliza said, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "But at least they'll be my words, not someone else's." She turned to Jonah. "I'll go with you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped. Old Samuel from the livery stable shook his head slowly, whether in disapproval or sympathy, Eliza couldn't tell. "You sure?" Jonah asked quietly, giving her one last chance to reconsider. "I'm sure." "Then let's go." Jonah moved toward his horse, keeping his body between Eliza and the 2 men. "Nice and easy now, no sudden moves." They'd made it perhaps 5 steps when Silas's voice rang out. "Stop them! She's my property, bought and paid for." Several men in the crowd shifted forward, hands moving toward weapons. Jonah's rifle came up in a smooth, practiced motion, the barrel sweeping across the would-be attackers. "First man who draws gets a bullet," Jonah said flatly. "I don't want to kill anyone today, but I will if I have to. Your call." The men froze, uncertain. They might work for Silas Mackenzie, but most of them were ranch hands and hired muscle, not gunfighters. Facing down a man with a Winchester who clearly knew how to use it was more than they'd signed up for. "Cowards," Silas spat. Then to Jonah, "You think you can just ride out of here? There's only one road out of town and I'll have men on it within the hour." "Then I guess we won't use the road," Jonah replied. He reached his horse and boosted Eliza up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. The buckskin danced nervously, sensing the tension. Jonah kept the rifle in one hand while taking the reins with the other, his arm coming around Eliza to hold her steady. "This isn't over," Silas called after them. "You hear me, Reed? I'll find you, and when I do—" Whatever threat he'd been about to make was lost as Jonah spurred the buckskin into motion. The horse leaped forward, its powerful muscles bunching and releasing as it carried them down Main Street at a gallop. Wind whipped Eliza's hair back, and she gripped the saddle horn with both hands, her heart in her throat. Behind them, shouts erupted. Then the crack of gunfire. "Stay low!" Jonah shouted, bending forward over her, making himself a shield between her and the bullets. Eliza pressed herself against the horse's neck, feeling the animal's heat and smelling its sweat. More shots rang out, lead buzzing through the air like angry hornets. The buckskin didn't falter, didn't slow, just kept running with the steady determination of a horse that had been in tight spots before and knew how to get out of them. They thundered past the last buildings of Red Hollow and out into the open country beyond. The shooting continued for a few more seconds, then stopped. They were out of effective range. Jonah didn't slow the horse, though. He kept them at a hard gallop for another mile, putting distance between them and the town before finally easing the buckskin back to a more sustainable pace. "You hit?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "No," Eliza managed, her own breathing ragged. "You?" "I'm fine." He paused. That was the easy part. Eliza twisted in the saddle to look back at Red Hollow, now just a collection of small wooden shapes in the distance. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, drifting up into the endless blue sky. She'd lived her entire life in that town. Everything she'd ever known was back there, and she'd just left it all behind. "What happens now?" she asked. Jonah was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced awareness of someone who'd spent years watching for trouble. "Now we ride. I've got a place about 30 miles from here, a small ranch where we can hole up for a bit. We'll figure out the next step from there." "They'll come after us." "Probably." He said it matter-of-factly, without fear or bravado. "Silas Mackenzie doesn't strike me as the kind of man who lets go of something he thinks belongs to him. And your father will want to save face. But we've got some time. Maybe a day, maybe less. Men like that, they'll want to organize, get more guns together before they come looking." "I'm sorry," Eliza said suddenly. "You didn't ask for this. I've dragged you into—" "You didn't drag me into anything," Jonah interrupted gently. "I made my own choice, just like you made yours. No apologies necessary." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's movement oddly soothing after the chaos of the morning. The land around them was typical Colorado high country, rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and juniper, mountains rising blue and massive in the distance. It was beautiful in its own harsh way, this land that didn't forgive mistakes or weakness. "Why did you do it?" Eliza asked finally. "Help me. I mean, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Jonah was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he might not answer. Then, "My sister. She was about your age when our father tried to force her into marriage with a man 3 times her age. Rich fellow who wanted a young wife and didn't care that Rachel was terrified of him. I was only 16, couldn't do much about it. Father was determined, and the law was on his side." "What happened?" "Rachel ran away the night before the wedding. We found her 3 days later in a canyon about 10 miles from home. She'd fallen trying to climb down the rocks in the dark." His voice went flat, emotionless. "Broke her neck. Died instantly," the doc said. "Oh God," Eliza breathed. "I'm so sorry." "Yeah, me too." Jonah shifted in the saddle. "After that, I left home. Couldn't stand to look at my father, couldn't stomach what his greed and pride had cost us. I've been drifting ever since. Ranch work mostly, some trail driving, whatever pays. And I swore that if I ever saw another girl being forced into something she didn't want, I'd do what I couldn't do for Rachel." Eliza felt tears prickling at her eyes. She was lucky to have a brother who cared that much. "She was dead at 18, Jonah said harshly. "That's not luck." They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now, companionable rather than awkward, built on shared understanding of loss and injustice. Eliza found herself relaxing slightly against Jonah's chest, letting him take some of her weight as exhaustion began to catch up with her. She hadn't slept well in days, terror and desperation keeping her awake through the dark hours. "You should rest," Jonah said, as if reading her thoughts. "We've got a few hours of riding ahead, and you'll need your strength." "I'm fine." "You're trembling, and I can feel your heart racing. You're running on fear and adrenaline, and when that wears off, you'll crash hard." His tone was matter-of-fact, but not unkind. "Close your eyes. I'll wake you if anything happens." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to prove that she wasn't some delicate flower who needed protecting. But the truth was, she was exhausted. Her ribs ached from her father's beating. Her arm throbbed where he'd gripped it, and her mind felt fuzzy around the edges from stress and lack of sleep. "Just for a few minutes," she said. She let her eyes drift closed, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid warmth of the man behind her. For the first time in weeks, she felt almost safe. It was probably an illusion. Silas Mackenzie's men could be organizing a posse right now, and who knew what dangers waited between here and Jonah's ranch. But for these few moments, she let herself believe it. Sleep claimed her quickly, dragging her down into darkness. Yeah. When Eliza woke, the sun had moved considerably across the sky. They were in rougher country now, the terrain broken and rocky, with pine trees beginning to appear on the hillsides. The buckskin picked its way carefully along a narrow trail that wound between boulders. "Good timing," Jonah said. "We're almost there." Eliza straightened, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. "How long was I asleep?" "Couple hours. You needed it." She looked back over her shoulder at him. His face was drawn with fatigue, dust coating his features. "What about you? When did you last sleep?" "Night before last. I'll catch a few hours once we're settled." The trail wound higher, following the curve of a ridge. As they crested the top, Eliza saw a valley spread below them, a narrow green space carved between hills, with a creek running through its center. Near the water stood a small cabin, weathered logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney rising from one end. A lean-to stable and a corral occupied the space behind the cabin, currently empty. "Home sweet home," Jonah said with a slight smile. "Not much to look at, but it's sturdy and well hidden. You can't see it from the main trails, and anyone coming up that path we just took would be visible for a good half-mile." They descended into the valley. Up close, the cabin looked even more humble, but Eliza could see signs of care. The roof was solid, the door hung straight on its hinges, and someone had planted a small vegetable garden beside the house. Potatoes, from the look of the plants, and maybe some beans. Jonah dismounted and helped Eliza down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, muscles cramping from hours in the saddle. Jonah steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy. Let your legs wake up before you try walking." Eliza nodded, gripping his arm until the world stopped spinning. When she finally felt steady enough to stand on her own, she stepped back and really looked at the place that was apparently going to be her sanctuary. The valley was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. Aspens grew along the creek, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and wildflowers dotted the meadow grass. Indian paintbrush and columbine, and others Eliza didn't recognize. The air was cleaner here, cooler, scented with pine and water and growing things. "It's perfect," she said softly. Jonah glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "Perfect? It's barely civilized." "That's why it's perfect." She turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. No one watching, no one judging, just space to breathe. Understanding crossed Jonah's features. "Yeah, I guess I can see that." He started leading the buckskin toward the stable. "Come on, let's get settled before—" The sound of hoofbeats cut him off. Both of them froze. Jonah's hand dropped to his gun as he turned toward the sound. Eliza's heart kicked into overdrive. Had they been followed? Had Silas's men somehow tracked them here already? But it was only one horse, she realized, moving at an easy canter rather than the desperate speed of pursuit. A moment later, a rider appeared at the top of the trail. An older man on a gray mare, his weathered face creased with concern. "Samuel?" Eliza breathed, recognizing the livery stable owner from Red Hollow. The old man rode down into the valley and dismounted with a groan. "Damn arthritis," he muttered, then looked at them with serious eyes. "You two got about 4 hours, maybe less. Mackenzie's organizing a posse. He's offering $500 to anyone who helps bring you back." "How many men?" Jonah asked tersely. 8, maybe 10. Some are ranch hands, couple are bounty hunters he hired. They're well armed and motivated." Samuel pulled a small leather pouch from his saddlebag and tossed it to Jonah. "Here. Not much, but it'll buy you some supplies in the next town." Jonah caught it, weighing the coins inside with his hand. "Samuel, I can't—" "Yes, you can. Consider it payment for doing what the rest of us were too gutless to do." The old man turned to Eliza. "Your daddy's with them, girl. He's ranting about how you've been kidnapped, how you need to be saved from this dangerous stranger. Nobody believes him, but Mackenzie's money talks louder than the truth." Eliza felt something twist in her chest. Not quite pain, but close to it. Her father was hunting her, actually hunting her, like she was an escaped animal to be caught and returned to her pen. "Thank you for warning us," she said quietly. Samuel nodded. Your mama was a good woman. She wouldn't have wanted this for you. He climbed back onto his horse with visible effort. There's a trail that heads northwest from here, follows the ridge line. Hard riding, but if you push through the night, you can make it to Carson Springs by tomorrow evening. From there, you can catch a stage heading anywhere you want to go. Carson Springs, Jonah repeated, clearly memorizing the information. How far? 40 miles, give or take. Rough country. You'll need to walk the horse in places, but it'll keep you off the main roads where Mackenzie's men are looking. Samuel gathered his reins. Good luck to you both. You're going to need it. He turned his horse and rode back up the trail, disappearing over the ridge without looking back. 4 hours, Eliza said once he was gone. That's not much time. No, it's not. Jonah was already moving, his exhaustion seemingly forgotten as he shifted into action. We need to gather supplies, rest the horse for an hour, just enough to take the edge off, then move out. Can you ride all night? I'll do whatever I have to do. Good. He headed for the cabin. Come on, let's see what we're working with. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A single room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, and a bed in one corner. Shelves lined one wall, holding various supplies, canned goods, coffee, ammunition, a few basic medical supplies. A rifle rack hung beside the door, currently empty. Jonah started pulling items off the shelves, assessing what they could carry and what they'd have to leave behind. Eliza watched for a moment, then started helping, carefully packing the items into saddlebags. That dress won't work for hard riding, Jonah said, nodding toward her cream-colored gown. There should be some old clothes in the chest over there. They'll be big on you, but better than nothing. Eliza found the chest and opened it. Inside were men's clothes, shirts, pants, a worn leather vest. She pulled out the smallest items she could find and hesitated, suddenly aware that Jonah was still in the room. I'll step outside, he said, reading her discomfort. Call when you're decent. Once he was gone, Eliza quickly stripped off her mother's dress, folding it carefully despite knowing she'd probably never wear it again. The pants were indeed too large, requiring her to cinch the belt as tight as it would go and roll up the cuffs. The shirt hung loose, but the vest helped give it some shape. She caught sight of herself in a small mirror on the wall and almost laughed. She looked like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes, but she also looked free. I'm dressed, she called. Jonah came back in, his arms full of supplies from the stable. His eyes swept over her new outfit, and something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Better? You'll blend in more now, look less like someone being held against their will. They worked in efficient silence, packing everything they might need: food, water, ammunition, blankets, basic tools. Jonah added a second rifle and his few spare clothes, then stood in the middle of the cabin, looking around with something like regret. This was a good place, he said quietly. Peaceful. Will you come back? Maybe. Someday. If things settle down. He shook his head. But I doubt it. Mackenzie won't forget, and he won't forgive. Even if we get away clean, this place is burned. He'll have men watching it. Eliza felt a pang of guilt. In one impulsive moment, she'd cost this man his home, his sanctuary. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. Jonah picked up the saddlebags. I told you, I made my choice with my eyes open. Now come on. We've got maybe 3 hours before we need to ride, and I want to scout the trail before we commit to it. They spent the next 2 hours preparing. Jonah showed Eliza the northwest trail Samuel had mentioned, pointing out landmarks to watch for and potential dangers. Loose rock, narrow passages, places where they'd be exposed if anyone was watching from above. He taught her how to read the sky for weather changes, how to tell time by the position of the sun, basic survival skills that might mean the difference between life and death if they got separated. Eliza absorbed it all, determined not to be a burden. She'd been sheltered her whole life, kept ignorant of practical skills because women weren't supposed to need them. But she was a quick study, and desperation sharpened her attention. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jonah led the buckskin out of the stable. The horse had eaten well and rested and seemed eager to move. Jonah checked the cinches one more time, making sure everything was secure. Ready? He asked Eliza. She looked back at the cabin one last time, This place she'd been in for only a few hours, but that had represented her first taste of real freedom. Then she turned to face the trail ahead, the unknown future that waited somewhere beyond these hills. "Ready," she said. Jonah helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. The buckskin moved out at a steady walk, heading toward the northwest trail. As they climbed out of the valley, Eliza turned to look back one more time. That's when she saw them. Riders, at least 8 of them, just appearing at the top of the eastern trail, the same trail she and Jonah had used to enter the valley. Even from this distance, she could make out a large man on a black horse in the lead, Silas Mackenzie. "Jonah," she said urgently. He'd already seen them. His jaw tightened. "They're early. Must have pushed their horses harder than Samuel thought." He urged the buckskin forward. "Hold on. This is going to get rough." Below them, a shout went up as the posse spotted them. Eliza heard her father's voice rising above the others. There they are!" Then the shooting started, and Jonah kicked the buckskin into a run. The buckskin's hooves thundered against stone as they climbed the narrow trail, rocks skittering down the slope behind them. Eliza pressed herself low against the horse's neck, feeling Jonah's body curved protectively over hers, his breath coming hard and fast against her ear. Below them, the valley erupted with shouts, and the sharp crack of rifle fire echoing off the hills. "They're spreading out," Jonah said, his voice tight, trying to cut off the trail. Eliza risked a glance back and immediately wished she hadn't. The posse had split into 2 groups. Half were charging straight up the eastern trail, while the others were angling toward the north, attempting to flank them. Silas Mackenzie rode at the head of the main group, his black horse eating up the ground with powerful strides. Even from this distance, she could see the fury etched into his face. A bullet whined past them, close enough that Eliza felt the air displacement against her cheek. The buckskin snorted but didn't falter, its powerful haunches driving them higher up the treacherous path. Jonah leaned hard to the left, guiding the horse around a jutting boulder that provided momentary cover. "How far to the ridgeline?" Eliza gasped. "Quarter mile, maybe less." Jonah's arm tightened around her waist as the trail narrowed to barely wider than the horse itself. On their right, the hillside rose steep and unforgiving. On their left, a sheer drop fell away into darkness. "But they'll catch us before we make it if we stay on this path. What choice do we have?" Instead of answering, Jonah suddenly reined the buckskin hard to the right, off the trail entirely. The horse balked for a second, then obeyed, scrambling up the rocky slope through scrub brush and loose shale. Eliza clung to the saddle horn with both hands as the world tilted at a crazy angle. "What are you doing?" she shouted over the sound of sliding rock and labored breathing. "Taking the high ground. They'll expect us to run, so we fight." They crested a small rise, and Jonah pulled the buckskin to a halt behind a cluster of large boulders. He dismounted in one fluid motion, pulling his Winchester from its scabbard. "Stay low," he ordered, helping Eliza down. "Keep the horse calm and out of sight." "You can't fight them all," Eliza protested, but Jonah was already moving to the edge of the rocks, his rifle coming up to his shoulder. The first group of riders came around the bend in the trail below them, moving fast and bunched together, a fatal mistake. Jonah's first shot kicked up dust directly in front of the lead horse, causing it to rear and throw its rider. The man behind him pulled up short to avoid a collision, and suddenly the narrow trail was a confused mass of startled horses and cursing men. "Reed!" Silas Mackenzie's voice boomed from somewhere back down the trail. "You're only making this worse for yourself." Jonah worked the Winchester's lever, chambering another round. "Miss Hartwell doesn't want to marry you," he called back. "That should be the end of it." "The girl's not yours to decide for." That was Thomas Hartwell's voice, shrill with desperation. "She's my daughter, my property, until she's wed." "Nobody's property," Jonah muttered, then raised his voice. "You've got no legal right to force this marriage. Right away now, and nobody else gets hurt." The response was a volley of gunfire that sent lead spattering against the rocks around them. Eliza pressed herself flat against the ground, hands over her head, as chips of stone flew through the air. The buckskin danced nervously, and she grabbed its reins, trying to keep it from bolting. "Easy, easy," she whispered to the horse, her voice shaking. "We're all right. We're going to be all right." She wasn't sure if she was trying to convince the horse or herself. Jonah returned fire, his shots measured and deliberate rather than panicked. Each time he pulled the trigger, Eliza heard a shout or curse from below, though she couldn't tell if he was hitting anyone or just keeping them pinned down. The acrid smell of gun smoke filled the air, stinging her eyes and throat. "How many rounds do you have?" she asked during a brief lull. "Enough." Jonah ejected a spent cartridge and fed a fresh one into the chamber. "But we can't stay here forever. Once that other group makes it around to the North Trail, they'll have a clear shot at us from above." "So what do? We make them think twice about following us." He shifted position, targeting not the men, but the trail itself. His next 3 shots struck the path's edge where it clung to the hillside, dislodging rocks and dirt. The 4th shot hit something critical, and suddenly a whole section of the trail gave way, tumbling down the slope in a small avalanche of stone and earth. The gap it left was only about 6 feet wide, but on that narrow path with a sheer drop on one side, it might as well have been a canyon. The horses wouldn't cross it, and even on foot it would be treacherous. "That'll slow them down," Jonas said with grim satisfaction. "But not for long. They'll have to backtrack and find another route, which gives us maybe an hour." He grabbed the buckskin's reins from Eliza. "Time to move." They pushed higher up the slope, following a faint game trail that barely qualified as a path. The buckskin struggled with the steep grade, its hooves slipping on loose rock. Twice, Jonah had to dismount and lead the horse by hand across particularly treacherous sections, while Eliza scrambled along beside them, her borrowed pants snagging on brush and thorns. The sun had dropped below the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Soon it would be full dark, which would make the terrain even more dangerous but would also provide cover. Eliza's legs burned with exertion, her lungs aching as she gulped the thin mountain air. She thought she was strong from years of washing clothes and scrubbing floors. But this was different. This was sustained, desperate physical effort with life and death hanging in the balance. "Almost there," Jonah said, though whether he was encouraging her or the horse, Eliza couldn't tell. They finally reached the ridgeline as the last light faded from the sky. From this vantage point, Eliza could see for miles in every direction, rolling hills darkening to shadow, mountain peaks catching the final rays of sun like torches, and far below, the scattered lights of what might have been a distant ranch or mining camp. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, this vast wilderness that could hide them or kill them with equal indifference. Jonah pulled out a small spyglass and scanned the terrain behind them. His jaw tightened. "They're persistent, I'll give them that. I can see torches. They're moving up the alternate trail. Still at least 2 hours behind us, but they're not giving up." "Why would they?" Eliza said bitterly. "Silas Mackenzie doesn't strike me as a man who accepts defeat. And my father—" She trailed off, unable to find words for the complex mix of hurt and anger churning in her gut. Jonah lowered the spyglass and looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "Your father made his choices. They're not your responsibility. He's hunting me like an animal. He's hunting his own greed and pride. You're just the excuse." Jonah packed the spyglass away and mounted the buckskin, then reached down to help Eliza up. "Come on, we've got a long night ahead of us." They followed the ridgeline northwest, moving as quickly as they dared in the growing darkness. The trail Samuel had mentioned was barely visible even in daylight. At night, it was more suggestion than reality, requiring all of Jonah's skill to keep them on course. The buckskin picked its way carefully, trusting its rider's guidance. An hour into the night ride, they stopped to rest the horse and let their eyes adjust fully to the darkness. The moon had risen, a waning crescent that provided just enough light to cast strange shadows across the landscape. Eliza dismounted stiffly, every muscle in her body protesting. She'd been in the saddle for hours now, first during their initial escape, and now this grueling mountain trek. Jonah handed her a canteen. "Drink slow. We need to make it last." The water was tepid, but tasted like heaven. Eliza forced herself to take only a few swallows before handing it back. "How much farther to Carson Springs?" 30 miles, give or take. If we push through the night, we can make it by late morning." He paused, studying her face in the moonlight. "You holding up all right?" "Do I have a choice?" "There's always a choice. We can rest longer, or we can keep moving. But every minute we stand still is a minute they gain on us." Eliza looked back the way they'd come, half expecting to see torches cresting the ridge behind them. The darkness remained empty, but she knew it was an illusion. Out there in the night, 8 or more men were following their trail, driven by money and pride, and the kind of righteous anger men felt when their authority was challenged. "We keep moving," she said firmly. Something that might have been respect crossed Jonah's features. "All right then." They rode on through the darkness, the world reduced to the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the creak of leather, the whisper of wind through pine trees, and the distant howl of a coyote. Time seemed to lose meaning. 1 hour blended into the next until Eliza felt like they'd been riding forever, would be riding forever, trapped in this liminal space between one life and the next. She dozed fitfully against Jonah's chest, jerking awake each time the buckskin stumbled or Jonah shifted in the saddle. During one of these wakeful moments, she became aware that he was humming softly. Not quite a song, just a low rhythmic sound that seemed designed to keep himself alert. "What is that?" she asked, her voice rough with exhaustion. "Oh, nothing. Just something my mother used to sing." He fell silent for a moment, then said, "You should try to sleep properly. I'll wake you if anything happens." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see my father's face, or Silas Mackenzie's smile, or—" She shuddered. "What if they catch us?" "They won't. You can't know that." "No," Jonah admitted, "but I can make it as hard as possible for them, and I can promise you that I won't let them take you without a fight." "You could die for me, a complete stranger." "You stopped being a stranger the moment you chose freedom over safety." "But—" His arm tightened around her waist, a gesture that felt protective rather than possessive. "Besides, like I said, I couldn't save my sister. Maybe I can't save you either, but damned if I won't try." They rode in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence built on shared purpose and grudging trust. Eliza found herself thinking about Jonah's sister, Rachel, who'd chosen death over forced marriage. How desperate did someone have to be to make that choice? How much pain did you have to be in to see falling off a cliff in the dark as the better option? And how many other girls and women faced similar choices every day? Their voices unheard, their desires dismissed as irrelevant beside the wants and needs of fathers and husbands, and the men who thought they owned the world? The anger that rose in her chest was clean and sharp, burning away some of her fear. She wasn't going to be Rachel. She wasn't going to be another tragic story whispered about in parlors and saloons. She was going to survive this, and she was going to make a life on her own terms, whatever that took. Dawn found them descending the far side of the mountain range into gentler country. The sky lightened from black to gray to pink, revealing a landscape of rolling grassland dotted with stands of cottonwood and aspen. In the distance, Eliza could see what looked like buildings, the outer edges of Carson Springs, she hoped. "We're close," Jonah confirmed, following her gaze. "Another hour, maybe 2. But their pursuers were closer than they'd thought. As the sun cleared the horizon, painting the grassland gold, Eliza heard a sound that sent ice through her veins. The distant thunder of multiple horses moving fast. Jonah heard it too. His body went rigid behind her, and he turned in the saddle to look back. "Damn. They must have ridden all night too. How many? Can't tell yet, but they're coming hard." The buckskin was exhausted, its sides heaving, foam flecking its mouth. It had carried double weight over brutal terrain all night without complaint, but even the toughest horse had limits. Jonah urged it to a faster pace anyway, and the loyal animal responded, digging deep for reserves it probably didn't have. They raced across the open grassland, hooves drumming against hard-packed earth. The town grew larger ahead of them. Eliza could make out individual buildings now, see smoke rising from chimneys, distinguish the main street from the smaller side roads. So close. They were so close, but not close enough. The pursuing riders burst from the tree line behind them, and now Eliza could see them clearly in the morning light. 7 men, their horses lathered and wild-eyed, their faces set with grim determination. Silas Mackenzie rode in the lead on his black stallion, his coat streaming behind him like dark wings. Beside him rode Thomas Hartwell, her father, his face twisted with something that might have been desperation or might have been fury. Eliza couldn't tell and no longer cared. "They're gaining," she said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the terror coursing through her. "I know." Jonah's hand dropped to his rifle, but he didn't pull it free. Drawing a weapon now would mean stopping. and stopping would mean certain capture. Their only chance was to reach the town, reach witnesses, and perhaps the law. The gap closed. 300 yards, 200, 100. Eliza could hear the shouts now, her father's voice rising above the others. "Stop them! $50 to whoever brings them down!" A rifle cracked, and something plucked at Eliza's borrowed vest. Too close. They were shooting to wound or disable, not kill. They wanted her alive and unharmed for the marriage they still somehow believed would happen. The buckskin stumbled. Eliza felt it miss a step, felt the animal's exhaustion finally overwhelming its will. They weren't going to make it. Another 200 yards to the edge of town, and they weren't going to make it. Then salvation appeared in the form of an old man on a wagon coming out of Carson Springs, his load of lumber rattling behind him. Jonah aimed the buckskin straight at him. "What are you doing?" Eliza gasped. "Trust me." They thundered past the wagon, close enough that Eliza could see the shock on the old man's face. Behind them, she heard confused shouts as the posse tried to navigate around the obstacle. It wouldn't buy them much time, seconds maybe, but seconds might be enough. They crashed into Carson Springs at a full gallop, startling chickens into flight and sending a dog racing for cover. People scattered out of their way, shouting in alarm. Jonah guided the buckskin straight down Main Street, past a saloon, a general store, a bank, finally pulling up in front of a building with a wooden sign that read Sheriff's Office. He practically threw himself out of the saddle, dragging Eliza with him. The buckskin's legs trembled and its head drooped nearly to the ground. The poor animal had given everything it had. "In Quechua," Jonah said urgently, his hand on Eliza's back, propelling her toward the door. They burst into the sheriff's office just as the posse thundered up outside. The room was small and cluttered, a desk covered in papers, a gun rack on one wall, 2 cells in the back currently empty, and a middle-aged man with a star on his chest looking up from his coffee with startled eyes. "What in the—" "Sheriff, I need your protection," Eliza said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Those men outside are trying to force me into marriage against my will. They've been chasing us for hours, shooting at us." "That's a lie!" The office door slammed open and Silas Mackenzie strode in, his face flushed with exertion and anger. Behind him crowded Thomas Hartwell and 3 of his hired men, all armed, all looking ready for violence. "Sheriff, I'm Silas Mackenzie from Red Hollow. This man kidnapped my bride-to-be, and her father here can confirm it." "She's my daughter," Thomas added quickly. "This stranger took her against her will, and we've been trying to rescue her." The sheriff, his nameplate read John Garrett, set his coffee down carefully and stood. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, with the kind of face that had seen too much trouble to be easily impressed. His eyes moved between the 2 groups, assessing. "That's quite a story," he said slowly. "Now suppose somebody tells me what really happened, starting from the beginning." "I'll tell you what happened," Mackenzie snapped. "Thomas Hartwell owed me money, a significant sum. We reached an agreement that his daughter would marry me to settle the debt. Everything was legal and proper. Then this drifter," he jabbed a finger at Jonah, "showed up and took her at gunpoint." "Is that true?" Garrett asked Jonah. "You take this girl at gunpoint?" "I offered her a choice," Jonah replied evenly. "Something nobody else in Red Hollow seemed interested in doing. She said she didn't want the marriage, so I helped her leave." "She's 18 years old," Thomas protested. "A child. She doesn't know what she wants." "I'm 18 years old," Eliza said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Old enough to be married off for debt payment, apparently, but not old enough to decide I don't want that marriage." "Which is it, Father?" Thomas's face went red. "You ungrateful—" "That's enough," Garrett said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. He turned to Eliza. "Miss, I need to hear from you directly. No one else talking, no one else interfering. Did this man—" he nodded at Jonah— "force you to leave Red Hollow against your will?" Eliza met the sheriff's eyes squarely. "No, sir. He offered me sanctuary, and I accepted. The only people who forced me to do anything are these men here." "She's confused," Mackenzie said smoothly. "She's been through a traumatic experience, been on the run for hours. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Eliza shot back. "I'm saying I don't want to marry you. I'm saying my father tried to sell me to pay his gambling debts. I'm saying I'd rather die than go back to Red Hollow with you." You see? Thomas appealed to the sheriff. This man's poisoned her mind against us, against her own family. Garrett held up a hand for silence. He walked slowly around his desk, his eyes never leaving Eliza's face. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. Miss Hartwell, I need you to understand something. In the eyes of the law, until you're married, your father has certain rights regarding your welfare. If he says you were taken against his wishes, even if you went willingly, there could be legal consequences for Mr. Reed here. So women have no rights? Eliza demanded. We're just property to be traded between men? I didn't say that. But that's what you're telling me. That even though I'm 18, even though I clearly stated I don't want this marriage, my father's wishes matter more than mine. Garrett looked uncomfortable. The law is complicated. The law is wrong. Maybe so, but I still have to enforce it. John, Jonah said quietly, and Eliza realized the two men knew each other. You know me. You know I wouldn't hurt a woman. All I did was give her a choice. I know that, Jonah, but knowing it and being able to do something about it are two different things. Garrett sighed heavily. Look, here's how this is going to work. Miss Hartwell, you're free to go wherever you want. I can't legally hold you, but Mr. Mackenzie here has a contract with your father, and if you don't honor it, he has the right to pursue his legal remedies. What does that mean? Eliza asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. It means he can take your father to court for breach of contract. It means your father could lose everything he owns. And depending on how the judge sees it, there could be criminal charges too. So my choices are marry Silas Mackenzie or destroy my father financially and possibly see him jailed. Eliza felt something break inside her. Not her resolve, but her last fragile hope that the law might actually protect her. There might be other options, Garrett started, but Mackenzie cut him off. No other options. We had a deal, and I expect it to be honored. Either the girl marries me willingly, or I'll use every legal means at my disposal to make her and her father's life a living hell. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who knew he held all the cards. And as for you, Reed, I'm charging you with kidnapping. Sheriff, I want him arrested. Now hold on, Garrett said, his hand raised. I haven't heard anything that constitutes kidnapping. He took her across county lines without her father's permission. That's kidnapping by definition. She went willingly. She's a minor under her father's authority. She's 18. That's legal age in most territories. Not in this one. Not without parental permission until she's 21 or married. Eliza watched this legal tennis match with growing horror. Silas Mackenzie had thought this through, had lined up his arguments and his legal standing. He'd probably planned this even before they'd fled Red Hollow, knowing exactly how to use the law as a weapon. Sheriff, Jonah said calmly, though Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders, are you actually going to arrest me for helping a woman escape a forced marriage? Garrett looked miserable. Jonah, you're putting me in a hell of a position here. I'm putting you in a position? What about her? Jonah gestured at Eliza. You're going to stand there and tell me the law says she has to marry a man she doesn't want, just because her father says so? The law says a lot of things that don't sit right with me, Garrett admitted, but I took an oath to uphold it, not to pick and choose which parts I like. Then your oath is worth about as much as my father's word, Eliza said bitterly. Mackenzie stepped forward, his hand extended toward Eliza. Come along, girl. We've wasted enough time on this foolishness. We'll head back to Red Hollow and proceed with the wedding as planned. Eliza backed away, her hand finding Jonah's arm. No. It wasn't a request. And it wasn't a suggestion when I said no. Eliza's voice shook but didn't break. I won't marry you. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what contracts my father signed. I won't do it. Then your father goes to prison, loses everything, and dies in debt and disgrace, Mackenzie said coldly. Is that what you want? What I want is for you to leave me alone. Eliza, her father said, his voice taking on a wheedling quality. Please, sweetheart, be reasonable. This doesn't have to be difficult. Silas is a wealthy man, respected, powerful. You'd want for nothing, and it would save our family from ruin. Our family? Eliza laughed, sharp and bitter. We haven't been a family since Mother died, and you decided the bottom of a whiskey bottle was more important than your daughter." Thomas flinched as if she'd struck him. "That's not fair." "Fair?" Eliza felt years of suppressed anger finally breaking free. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you sold me like livestock? Was it fair when you beat me for trying to escape? Was it fair when you dragged me down Main Street like a prisoner being led to execution? I did what I had to do to survive." "You did what was easiest. You took the coward's way out, sacrificing your daughter rather than facing the consequences of your own actions." The room fell silent. Thomas Hartwell's face had gone pale, his hands trembling. For a moment, Eliza thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by stubborn pride. "I'm still your father," he said quietly, "and you'll do as I say." "No," Eliza replied just as quietly. "I won't. Not anymore. You stopped being my father when you decided I was something you could trade away." "Enough of this," Mackenzie snapped. "Sheriff, are you going to arrest Reed or not?" Garrett looked at Jonah, then at Eliza, then back at Mackenzie. Eliza could see the conflict in his face, duty warring with conscience. Finally, he shook his head. "I need more time to review the legal standing here. This isn't as clear-cut as you're making it out to be, Mackenzie. Interstate marriage laws, parental rights, age of majority. It's complicated. What's complicated about it? I have a signed contract, and she has a right to due process. I'm not arresting anyone today until I've consulted with a territorial judge on the legal issues involved." Mackenzie's face darkened with anger. "You're making a mistake, Garrett. I have friends in high places. You obstruct me, and it'll cost you that badge." "Maybe," Garrett said evenly. "But for now, I still have it, and I'm telling you all to clear out of my office. Come back tomorrow, and I'll have some answers for you." "Tomorrow?" Thomas spluttered. "You expect us to just wait while—" "Yes, I expect you to wait. That's how the law works, with patience and process, not mob justice." Garrett's hand had drifted to rest on his gun belt, a subtle but unmistakable warning. "Now, like I said, everybody out, and I don't want any trouble in my town tonight. You men find somewhere to stay, get some food and rest. You look like you've been riding hard." Mackenzie stared at the sheriff for a long, tense moment. Then he turned on his heel and stalked out, his men following. Thomas lingered for a second, his eyes on Eliza, but she turned away, unable to look at him. When the door finally closed behind them, Eliza felt her knees go weak. Jonah caught her, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy," he murmured. "You did good in there." "Did I?" Eliza laughed shakily. "I think I just made everything worse." "You stood up for yourself. That's never wrong." Jonah looked at Garrett. "Thanks, John. I know that wasn't easy." "Don't thank me yet," Garrett said grimly. "I bought you one night, maybe two if I'm lucky, but Mackenzie's right. He's got legal standing and he's got money and influence. Unless we find a loophole somewhere, the law is going to side with him." "There has to be something," Eliza said desperately. "Some way to break the contract, some protection under the law." "I'll look into it," Garrett promised. "But I won't lie to you, miss. The laws regarding marriage and parental authority heavily favor men like your father and Mackenzie. Women have very few rights in these situations." "Then the laws need to change." "Maybe they will someday. But that doesn't help you today." Eliza sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. They'd ridden all night, been shot at, chased across mountains, and for what? To buy one night of reprieve before the same nightmare started all over again? "There's a boarding house 2 streets over," Garrett was saying to Jonah. "Mrs. Chen runs it. Tell her I sent you and she'll give you a fair rate. Get some rest, both of you. You look like death warmed over." "What about Mackenzie and his men?" "I'll keep an eye on them, but Jonah—" Garrett's expression grew serious. "Don't leave town tonight. If you run again, it'll just confirm everything Mackenzie's saying about kidnapping. Let me try to work this out legally first." Jonah nodded slowly. "All right, but if legal doesn't work out, I'm not handing her over. You understand that?" "Yeah," Garrett said quietly. "I understand. I just hope it doesn't come to that." They left the sheriff's office, stepping out into the bright morning sunlight. Carson Springs was waking up properly now, people moving along the wooden sidewalks, shops opening their doors, the smell of breakfast cooking drifting from the boarding house and the restaurant across the street. It looked peaceful, normal, utterly at odds with the chaos of Eliza's life. "Come on," Jonah said gently. "Let's get you somewhere you can rest properly." Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a tidy two-story building with lace curtains in the windows and flower boxes full of geraniums. The proprietor herself was a small Chinese woman of indeterminate age with shrewd eyes that took in their disheveled appearance, the borrowed clothes Eliza wore, and the exhaustion etched into both their faces. "Sheriff Garrett sent us," Jonah said. "We need 2 rooms." Mrs. Chen named a price, and Jonah counted out coins from the pouch Samuel had given him. As she handed over the keys, she said quietly, "I saw those men ride in after you. Rough-looking bunch. You want me to keep an eye out?" "Please," Eliza said gratefully. Mrs. Chen studied Eliza for a moment longer. "You look like you could use a hot bath and a proper meal. I'll have water sent up, and breakfast will be ready in an hour." The room Eliza was shown to was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the street. After Mrs. Chen left, Eliza stood at that window for a long time, watching Carson Springs go about its daily business, wondering if anywhere in the world would ever feel safe again. A knock on the door made her jump. "It's me," Jonah's voice called. She opened the door to find him standing there with an armful of clothing. "I asked Mrs. Chen if she had anything that might fit you. These belong to her daughter," she said. "Might be better than wearing my old clothes." Eliza took the bundle, a simple dress, a shawl, some undergarments, all clean and neatly folded. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did," Jonah interrupted gently. "Get some rest, Eliza. We'll figure out the next step when you wake up." But rest didn't come easily. Eliza lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Tomorrow, Sheriff Garrett would give them his decision. Tomorrow, she might be forced to marry Silas Mackenzie after all, or Jonah might be arrested, or some other disaster might unfold. They'd fled Red Hollow, ridden through the night, escaped bullets and pursuit, and for what? To end up right back where they started? No. Whatever happened, she wouldn't go back. She'd made her choice on Main Street in Red Hollow when she'd said that single powerful word, no. And she'd meant it. Even if it meant running for the rest of her life, even if it meant Jonah died protecting her, even if it cost her everything, she'd meant it. Eliza woke to the sound of breaking glass. For a moment, disoriented by exhaustion and the unfamiliar room, she didn't understand what the sound meant. Then she heard shouting from the street below, and her blood turned to ice. She scrambled out of bed, still wearing the borrowed clothes she'd been too tired to change out of, and rushed to the window. The sun had set while she slept, and Carson Springs was bathed in the purple light of dusk. Below, in the street, a crowd had gathered, and at its center stood Silas Mackenzie, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "She's up there," he was shouting, pointing at the boarding house. "That girl belongs with me, and I'm not leaving without her." Eliza's door burst open without warning. She spun around, her heart in her throat. But it was only Jonah, his face grim and his hand on his gun. "Get away from the window," he ordered. "And get your things. We're leaving." "What's happening?" "Mackenzie's been drinking all afternoon, working himself up. His men, too. Garrett can't hold them back anymore without starting a war in the middle of town." "Where's the sheriff now?" "Trying to talk sense into a drunk man who thinks he owns you." Jonah grabbed the saddlebags they'd brought in earlier. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they storm this building. Mrs. Chen's holding the front door, but she can't hold it forever." Eliza's hands shook as she pulled on the shawl Mrs. Chen had given her. "I thought we were supposed to wait for the legal process." "Legal process just went out the window. Literally." Jonah's smile was grim. "Come on. There's a back staircase." They moved quickly through the boarding house, passing Mrs. Chen's frightened face as she stood in the front hall, a broom clutched in her hands like a weapon. Outside, Mackenzie's voice had risen to a roar, and other voices joined it, men who'd been paid or persuaded to join his cause. "Thank you," Eliza whispered to Mrs. Chen as they passed. The older woman pressed something into Eliza's hand, a small knife in a leather sheath. "Just in case," she said quietly, You're braver than you know, girl. Don't let them take that from you. The back stairs led down to a narrow alley behind the boarding house. Jonah had the buckskin waiting there, already saddled, though the poor horse still looked exhausted from their previous ordeal. Standing beside it was Sheriff Garrett, his face troubled in the dim light. "I'm sorry," he said as they emerged. "I tried to keep them contained, but Mackenzie's got the whole damn town stirred up. He's been spreading money around, buying drinks, telling everyone you're some kind of innocent victim being held against your will by a dangerous drifter." "Where are his men?" Jonah asked, scanning the alley. "Most are out front with him, but he's got 2 watching the stable and probably others scattered around." Garrett handed Jonah a rolled piece of paper. "This is a letter explaining the situation as I see it. If you make it to the territorial capital, give this to Judge Harrison. He's a fair man and he owes me a favor. Maybe he can help." "You're letting us go?" Eliza asked, surprised. "I'm looking the other way for about 60 seconds while you happen to leave town." Garrett's expression was pained. "It's the best I can do. The law might not be on your side, but that doesn't mean it's right." A crash from the front of the building made them all jump. The sound of splintering wood followed. They were breaking down Mrs. Chen's door. "Go," Garrett said urgently. "Head east, not west. They'll expect you to run for the territorial line, so do the opposite. There's a canyon about 10 miles out, narrow and twisting. If you can make it there before they catch you, you might be able to lose them in the rocks." Jonah swung into the saddle and pulled Eliza up behind him. "John, when this is over, if you're still alive when it's over, buy me a drink and we'll call it even." Garrett stepped back, his hand moving to his gun belt as shouts echoed from inside the boarding house. "Now ride before I have to shoot you myself to maintain appearances." They rode. The buckskin, despite its exhaustion, responded to Jonah's urgency, moving from a walk to a trot to a canter as they navigated the back alleys of Carson Springs. Behind them, the shouting intensified. Someone had discovered their escape. "There!" a voice yelled. "They're getting away!" Gunfire erupted, bullets whining through the narrow space between buildings. Jonah bent low over the horse's neck, urging it faster. They burst out of the alley onto a side street, scattering chickens and causing a man carrying a barrel to dive out of their way with a curse. "Stop them!" That was Mackenzie's voice, hoarse with rage and alcohol. $50 to whoever brings them down. More riders appeared, materializing from different streets as Mackenzie's men converged on their position. The buckskin was fast, but not fast enough. Not exhausted as it was, not carrying double weight. They weren't going to make it out of town before being overtaken. Jonah seemed to realize this at the same moment Eliza did. Instead of heading for the town's edge, he suddenly veered the buckskin down a narrow gap between 2 buildings, barely wide enough for a horse, forcing their pursuers to follow single file. Then he turned again and again, navigating a maze of back passages and service alleys that confused and slowed the men chasing them. "Where are we going?" Eliza gasped, clinging to him as the horse dodged around a stack of crates. "Anywhere they're not." Jonah guided the buckskin around another corner. They emerged onto the town's main street near the livery stable and found 3 of Mackenzie's men waiting there, guns already drawn. The men opened fire immediately. Jonah jerked the buckskin sideways, directly toward the stable. The horse crashed through the partially open door, scattering loose straw and causing the animals inside to whinny in alarm. Jonah didn't stop. He guided the buckskin straight through the building and out the back door, emerging into the open country beyond the town's eastern edge. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the horse into a full gallop. The land here was rougher than the grassland they'd crossed the day before. Rocky ground rose and fell in irregular waves, scattered with brush and stunted trees. The fading light made it treacherous. One wrong step could send the horse tumbling, breaking its legs and leaving them stranded. But Jonah didn't slow. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder as more riders joined the chase. They'd been riding for perhaps 15 minutes when the buckskin stumbled. It was just for a second, a brief loss of rhythm, but Eliza felt it. The horse was done. It had given everything, more than everything, and was running now on will alone. "Jonah?" she said urgently. "The horse. I know." His voice was tight. "Just a little farther. The canyon's close." But close wasn't close enough. The gap between them and their pursuers was narrowing with every stride. Eliza could hear individual voices now, could make out faces in the gathering darkness. Mackenzie rode at their head, his features twisted with fury, his gun in his hand. Then the ground changed, the rocky terrain gave way to solid stone, and suddenly they were riding along the edge of a deep fissure in the earth, the canyon Garrett had mentioned. It was narrow, maybe 50 feet across at its widest point, with sheer walls dropping away on both sides. The trail along its edge was barely wide enough for a horse. "There," Jonah said, pointing. Ahead, the trail descended into the canyon itself, winding down the rock face in a series of switchbacks. "If we can get down there before they reach us, we can lose them in the rocks." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only plan they had. Jonah guided the buckskin toward the descent. The horse balked at first, sensing the danger, but Jonah urged it forward with gentle pressure and soft words. The animal trusted its rider, trusted enough to take that first step down the narrow, treacherous path. The world tilted sickeningly. On one side, the canyon wall rose up, dark and impassable. On the other side, nothing but empty air and a drop of at least 100 feet to the rocky canyon floor below. The trail was loose dirt and gravel, shifting under the horse's hooves with every step. One mistake, one slip, and they'd plunge into that darkness. Eliza pressed herself against Jonah's back, not daring to look down. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. The buckskin descended carefully, step by terrifying step, its breath coming in harsh gasps. They'd made it perhaps halfway down when their pursuers reached the canyon's edge. Rifles cracked, the sound echoing off the stone walls. Bullets struck the rock face near them, sending stone chips flying. The buckskin danced nervously, its hooves sliding on the loose trail. "Easy, easy," Jonah murmured to the horse, his voice remarkably calm given their circumstances. "Just a little more." They reached the canyon floor just as full darkness fell. Down here, surrounded by towering walls of stone, the shadows were absolute. Jonah dismounted and helped Eliza down, then led the buckskin deeper into the maze of rocks. The horse was trembling, its legs unsteady, foam covering its neck and flanks. "Will they follow us down?" Eliza whispered. "Not in the dark. Too dangerous." Jonah ran his hand along the buckskin's neck, checking for injuries. "They'll camp up top and wait for first light, which gives us the night to find a way out of here. And if there is no way out?" Jonah didn't answer, which was answer enough. They moved deeper into the canyon, feeling their way more than seeing. The walls pressed close on both sides, and overhead the slice of visible sky was so narrow it showed only a handful of stars. Their footsteps echoed strangely, bouncing off stone in ways that made it hard to tell which direction sounds were coming from. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Jonah stopped. "Here, this'll do for now." Here was a small hollow in the canyon wall, barely deep enough to be called a cave, but providing some shelter from the wind that had picked up. Jonah tethered the buckskin loosely, giving it enough rope to lie down if it wanted to. Then he and Eliza settled on the cold stone, their backs against the rock. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Eliza could hear the buckskin's labored breathing, could hear distant voices echoing from above as Mackenzie's men made camp, could hear her own pulse pounding in her ears. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Your horse, it's hurt because of me. You've lost your home, you're being hunted, you might end up in prison or dead, all because—" "Stop," Jonah said firmly. He found her hand in the darkness and squeezed it. "I made my choice. You made yours. Neither of us should apologize for choosing what's right over what's easy." "Is it right, though?" Eliza's voice cracked. "Maybe I should have just married a man you didn't love, spent your life as property, ended up like Rachel, so desperate that death seemed like the better option?" Jonah's grip tightened. "No. What you're doing is fighting for your freedom. That's always right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Eliza felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She was exhausted and terrified and completely out of options, trapped in a canyon with armed men waiting above and no clear way forward. And yet, sitting here in the dark with this man who'd risked everything for a stranger, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We wait for morning. Then we find a way through this canyon, or around it, or over it, and we keep moving until we're somewhere safe." Is there such a place? Somewhere Mackenzie can't reach us? There has to be. Jonah shifted, pulling his coat off and draping it over Eliza's shoulders. The world's a big place, bigger than one man's reach, no matter how powerful he thinks he is. They sat in silence after that, conserving their energy and their words. Eliza must have dozed eventually, because she woke with a start to find pale light filtering into the canyon from above. Dawn. She could hear movement on the canyon rim, the sounds of men preparing to descend. Jonah was already awake, checking his rifle and pistol. His face in the gray morning light looked harder than she'd seen it before, the expression of a man preparing for violence. "How many bullets do you have?" she asked. "Enough for what needs doing." He looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. "Eliza, I need you to listen carefully. If it comes down to a fight, and it might, I need you to run. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just find a way out of this canyon and keep going. I won't leave you. You will if I tell you to, because if I'm fighting, it means I'm trying to buy you time to escape. Don't waste that time. Don't make my choice meaningless." Before Eliza could respond, voices echoed down from above. "Reed, we know you're down there." It was Mackenzie, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "There's no way out except back up this trail, and we've got it covered. You're trapped." Jonah stood, rifle in hand. "You don't have to do this, Mackenzie. Let the girl go. Find someone who actually wants to marry you." Laughter echoed down, harsh and mocking. "You think this is about wanting? This is about what I paid for, about what I'm owed, and I always collect my debts." "She's not a debt. She's a person. She's property her father sold me. Same thing." A pause. "I'm giving you one chance, Reed. Send the girl up and you can ride away. I've got no quarrel with you beyond this." "He's lying," Eliza said quietly. "He'll kill you the moment I'm in his hands." "I know." Jonah raised his voice. "Here's my counteroffer, Mackenzie. You and your men ride away, and I don't put a bullet through your skull." More laughter. "Big talk from a man trapped at the bottom of a canyon. Let me show you how this is going to go." A rifle shot rang out, striking the wall near their shelter and sending rock chips flying. Then another, and another. They weren't aiming to hit. They were demonstrating that anyone in the canyon was a target, that there was nowhere to hide. "They're going to pin us here while some of them come down," Jonah said. "Classic pincer movement. We can't stay in this spot." "Where do we go?" "Deeper. Hope there's another way out." He grabbed the buckskin's reins. The horse struggled to its feet, moving stiffly. It was hurt, probably pulled something during the descent last night. "Come on. Stay close to the wall. Move fast." They ran deeper into the canyon, bullets kicking up dust around their feet. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening into boulder-strewn spaces, sometimes narrowing to gaps they had to squeeze through sideways. Behind them, Eliza heard shouts as men began descending into the canyon. "There," Jonah said, pointing. Ahead, the canyon forked, one branch continuing deeper into the rock, the other angling upward. The upward path might lead out. They took it, scrambling over loose rock and using handholds carved by centuries of water erosion. The buckskin couldn't follow. The path was too steep, too narrow. Jonah looked back at the horse, conflict clear on his face. "Go," Eliza said. "The horse can't make it. We have to leave it. He's carried us this far. And he can't carry us any farther. Jonah, they're coming. We have to move now." Jonah squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, then nodded. He loosened the buckskin saddle and slipped the bridle off, freeing the animal from its burden. "Go on," he told the horse. "Find your way out of here." The buckskin looked at them with liquid brown eyes, then turned and limped back the way they'd come, moving on instinct toward water and grass and freedom. Eliza and Jonah climbed. The path was treacherous, loose rock sliding away under their feet, thorny bushes tearing at their clothes and skin. But it did lead upward, winding back and forth across the canyon wall. Below them, voices echoed as their pursuers reached the fork and split up, some following the main canyon, others taking the upward path. "They're behind us," Eliza panted. "I know! Keep climbing!" They emerged onto a narrow ledge about halfway up the canyon wall. The path continued upward, but there was also a gap in the rock here, a fissure barely wide enough to squeeze through. Jonah peered into it, then looked at Eliza. It might lead somewhere, or it might be a dead end, but if we stay on this path, they'll overtake us within minutes. Then we take the fissure. They squeezed into the gap, moving sideways with their backs pressed against cold stone. It was dark in here, claustrophobic, the walls so close that Eliza had to turn her head to fit through some sections. She tried not to think about being trapped, about the tons of rock above her that could shift and crush her at any moment. The fissure opened into a small cave, and the cave led to another narrow passage, and that passage led upward again. They were climbing through the bones of the earth, following routes carved by ancient water or earthquake, or the slow grinding of geological time. Sometimes they had to crawl, sometimes scramble, sometimes squeeze through gaps that barely accommodated human bodies. Behind them, the voices faded. They'd lost their pursuers. For now. They finally emerged into daylight on the far side of the canyon, gasping and bruised and bleeding from a dozen small cuts. The sun was higher now, maybe 2 hours past dawn. Below them stretched a different landscape than the one they'd fled through, a valley of scrub and juniper leading toward distant mountains. "We made it," Eliza breathed. "We're not safe yet." Jonah scanned the horizon, his hand shading his eyes. "They'll figure out we went through eventually, and we're on foot now, which means they'll catch us if we stay in the open." "Then where do we go?" Jonah pointed to a dark line in the valley floor several miles distant. "That looks like a creek bed. Might be dry this time of year, but it'll provide cover and a path. If we can reach the mountains beyond, there are mining camps, settlements, places we can disappear." They started walking. The sun beat down mercilessly as the day progressed. They had one canteen of water between them, which they rationed carefully, taking only small sips to wet their parched throats. Eliza's feet, still in the boots she'd worn during their initial flight from Red Hollow, blistered and bled. Every step was agony. But she didn't complain. Couldn't complain because Jonah was limping too, though he tried to hide it. Around midday, they heard distant gunshots echoing across the valley. Eliza turned to look back and saw figures on horseback emerging from the canyon, tiny with distance but unmistakable. "They're through," she said. "Then we move faster." But faster was relative when you were on foot and they were on horseback. The gap closed steadily. By mid-afternoon, Eliza could make out individual riders. 7 of them, she counted. Mackenzie on his black stallion, her father on a bay, and 5 hired guns. "We're not going to make it to the mountains," she said, her voice flat with exhaustion and despair. "No," Jonah agreed. "We're not." They'd reached the creek bed now, and it was indeed dry, just a channel of white sand and smooth stones winding through the valley. The banks rose 6 or 8 feet on either side, providing some shelter from view, but also limiting their mobility. Jonah stopped walking and turned to face back the way they'd come. His hand moved to check his weapons, rifle, pistol, the knife in his boot. His face was set with grim determination. "What are you doing?" Eliza asked, though she already knew. "Making a stand. This is as good a place as any. High banks for cover, clear sight lines. And if I can hold them here, you can use the creek bed to keep moving toward those foothills." "Jonah, no. They'll kill you." "Maybe. But I'll take a few of them with me, and that'll improve your odds." He turned to look at her, and his expression softened. "Eliza, you've got to run now. Don't argue, don't hesitate, just run." "I won't leave you to die for me." "Then you'll waste everything I've done, everything we've both fought for." He gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. "Listen to me. If you stay, we both die, or worse. If you go, at least one of us makes it. At least one of us gets to be free." Tears streamed down Eliza's face. "This isn't fair." "No, but very little in life is." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in a brief, fierce embrace. Then he pushed her away gently but firmly. "Go, now, and don't look back." Eliza stumbled backward, her vision blurred by tears. She wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to find some miraculous solution that saved them both. But there was none. Jonah was right. This was the only play they had left. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For seeing me as more than property. For giving me a choice." "You're welcome. Now go be free. Make it mean something." Eliza turned and ran down the creek bed, her boots slipping on the smooth stones, her breath coming in ragged sobs. Behind her, she heard Jonah's rifle crack once, twice, 3 times. Measured shots meant to slow the pursuers rather than kill them outright. Then the answering fire began, a sustained volley that echoed through the valley like thunder. Eliza ran harder, driven by terror and grief in equal measure. She didn't look back. Couldn't look back because if she did, she'd turn around and run back to Jonah, and that would make his sacrifice meaningless. The gunfire continued behind her, then suddenly intensified. She heard shouting, the whinnying of frightened horses, more shots fired. So many shots. Too many. And underneath it all, Jonah's Winchester singing its deadly song, slower now, more deliberate. Then silence. Eliza's steps faltered. The silence was worse than the gunfire because she knew what it meant. She pressed herself against the creek bank, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her face. He was dead. Jonah Reed, who'd saved her life, who'd given her freedom, who'd stood against the world for a stranger's right to choose her own path. He was dead, and she was alone. Movement at the top of the creek bank made her freeze. A shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see a man silhouetted against the sky, his gun pointed down at her. "Got her," the man called over his shoulder. "She's here." Eliza reached for the small knife Mrs. Chen had given her, the one tucked in her boot. If this was the end, she wouldn't go quietly. She'd fight until her last breath, just as Jonah had. More men appeared at the creek bank. Mackenzie dismounted and half slid down into the channel, his face flushed with triumph and rage. Behind him came her father, looking older and more haggard than she'd ever seen him. "Finally," Mackenzie said, reaching for her. Eliza pulled the knife and slashed at him. The blade caught his outstretched hand, opening a line of red across his palm. He jerked back with a curse. "You little—" He backhanded her across the face, and Eliza's head snapped sideways, stars exploding across her vision. The knife fell from her nerveless fingers. "Enough," Thomas Hartwell said weakly. "You've got her, no need to hurt her." "Your daughter just cut me, Thomas. I'd say there's plenty of need." But Mackenzie didn't hit her again. Instead, he grabbed her arm in a grip that would leave bruises. "Where's Reed?" Eliza said nothing, just stared at him with all the hatred she could muster. "Dead, probably," one of the hired guns said, appearing at the top of the bank. "He took Murphy and Chen with him, and Rollins is bleeding bad, but we got him in the end. He's down." Something inside Eliza broke at those words. Not her spirit, that remained intact, burning with fury, but her last fragile hope that somehow Jonah might have survived, might have escaped, died in that moment. "Good riddance," Mackenzie said. He started dragging Eliza back toward where the horses waited. "Let's get back to civilization. We've wasted enough time on this foolishness." "What about Reed's body?" someone asked. "Leave it for the coyotes. He's not worth the effort of a grave." They hauled Eliza up out of the creek bed and threw her onto a horse, her hands tied to the saddle horn. Mackenzie mounted behind her, his arm like an iron bar across her waist. The group turned their horses back toward Carson Springs, moving at a steady trot. Eliza looked back once, toward the creek bed where Jonah had made his stand. She couldn't see him from here, couldn't see any sign of what had happened beyond some disturbed sand and a few dark stains that might have been blood. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." But sorry changed nothing. Jonah was dead, and she was captured, and in a few days she'd be forced to marry the man whose arm now held her prisoner. Everything they'd fought for, everything they'd sacrificed, had been for nothing. Or had it? As they rode through the afternoon heat, Eliza felt something hardening inside her. Jonah had died to give her a chance at freedom. She'd failed to escape this time, but that didn't mean she'd stop trying. It didn't mean she'd submit or give up or accept the future these men were trying to force on her. She'd tried running. Next time, she'd try something different. Next time, someone was going to pay for what they'd done. The ride back to Carson Springs took 4 hours, and every minute of it burned itself into Eliza's memory like a brand. Mackenzie's arm never loosened around her waist, his breath hot against her neck as he occasionally leaned close to whisper threats disguised as promises about their upcoming marriage. Her father rode beside them, his eyes downcast, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. The remaining hired guns, 3 now, after Jonah had taken 2 and wounded another, flanked them with weapons drawn, as if Eliza posed some mortal threat despite being bound and unarmed. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she memorized everything: the route they took, the weaknesses in their formation, which men seemed uncomfortable with what they'd done, and which seemed eager for more violence. Information was a weapon, and it was the only one she had left. They reached Carson Springs as the sun touched the horizon, painting the town in shades of blood and fire. Word of their return had somehow preceded them, and a crowd had gathered in the main street, curious townspeople, Sheriff Garrett looking grim and helpless, Mrs. Chen standing on the boarding house steps with tears streaming down her face. Mackenzie paraded Eliza down Main Street like a trophy, making sure everyone saw that he'd reclaimed his property, that his authority had been restored. When they stopped in front of the boarding house, he finally released his grip on her and dismounted, then dragged her down from the saddle with enough force that she stumbled and nearly fell. "Sheriff!" Mackenzie called out, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "I'm charging this woman with conspiracy to commit murder. She aided and abetted Jonah Reed in the deaths of 2 of my men." "That's a lie," Eliza said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I never conspired to do anything. Your men chased us, shot at us, tried to kill us. Jonah Reed defended us both." "Reed murdered 2 good men and wounded a 3rd, Mackenzie shot back. "And you helped him escape in the first place. That makes you an accessory." Garrett stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Silas, you're pushing this too far. The girl hasn't broken any laws. She ran away from a legal marriage contract. She helped a man resist lawful pursuit. She exercised her right to refuse a marriage she didn't consent to," a new voice interrupted. Everyone turned to see a man stepping out of the sheriff's office, tall and silver-haired, wearing a suit that had seen better days but still carried an air of authority. He held a leather satchel in one hand and a paper in the other, and his sharp gray eyes took in the scene with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to weighing evidence. "Judge Harrison," Garrett said, relief evident in his voice. "I didn't expect you until tomorrow. I rode through the night after receiving your message." Harrison descended the steps, his gaze fixed on Mackenzie. "And it's fortunate I did, given what I'm hearing. Mr. Mackenzie, you're attempting to force a legal marriage on unwilling grounds. That's not just immoral. In territorial law, it's actionable." "I have a contract," Mackenzie snarled, "signed by her father. That makes it legal." "Contracts to sell human beings aren't legal, Mr. Mackenzie. Not since 1865. Harrison unfolded the paper he carried. "I've reviewed Sheriff Garrett's report, and I've also reviewed territorial statutes regarding marriage, consent, and parental authority. While it's true that fathers have certain legal rights regarding their daughters, those rights don't extend to selling them into unwilling marriages." "She's my daughter," Thomas spoke up, his voice defensive. "I have the right to arrange her future." "You have the right to guide her, Mr. Hartwell, not to sell her." Harrison turned to Eliza. "Miss Hartwell, I need to hear from you directly for the record. Do you consent to marry Silas Mackenzie?" Eliza met the judge's eyes, seeing something in them she'd almost forgotten existed: impartiality, fairness, actual justice. "No, sir. I do not consent, and I never have." "Has anyone forced you, coerced you, or threatened you regarding this marriage?" "Yes, sir. My father beat me when I tried to refuse. Mr. Mackenzie threatened to ruin my father financially if I didn't comply. They dragged me to a church against my will and would have completed the ceremony by force if Jonah Reed hadn't intervened." "And Mr. Reed, what was his involvement in all this?" "He saved my life," Eliza said simply. "He gave me a choice when no one else would, and he died defending me from men who believed they owned me." A murmur ran through the crowd. Harrison held up his hand for silence. "Mr. Mackenzie, based on what I'm hearing, I'm nullifying any contract you may have had with Mr. Hartwell regarding his daughter. Marriage requires consent from both parties, and that consent is clearly absent here." "You can't do that!" Mackenzie's face had gone purple with rage. "I paid good money for a person, which, as I've already explained, is illegal." Harrison's voice remained calm but carried steel underneath. "If Mr. Hartwell owes you money, you can pursue that debt through proper legal channels. But Miss Hartwell is not currency, not property, and not a commodity to be traded. She conspired with Reed to murder my men. Your men were chasing 2 people across open country while firing weapons at them. From where I stand, that sounds like assault with deadly weapons, and Mr. Reed's response sounds like self-defense. Harrison looked at Garrett. Sheriff, is there any evidence that Miss Hartwell herself committed any violent acts? None that I've seen, Your Honor. Then there are no charges to be filed against her. Harrison turned back to Mackenzie, and his expression hardened. However, I am filing charges against you, Mr. Mackenzie. Attempted kidnapping, assault, and unlawful pursuit with intent to harm. You organized an armed posse, chased 2 people across territorial land, and engaged in a gunfight that resulted in deaths on both sides. That's vigilante justice, and it won't be tolerated. You can't be serious. Mackenzie's voice had dropped to a dangerous growl. Do you know who I am? Do you know what kind of influence I have? I know exactly who you are. I also know that you've been skating on the edge of the law for years, using your money and influence to avoid consequences. Harrison gestured to Garrett. Sheriff, take Mr. Mackenzie into custody. He'll stand trial for his actions. You're making a mistake, Harrison, Mackenzie said softly. A big one. The only mistake I see is that men like you have been allowed to operate without oversight for too long. Harrison nodded to Garrett, who moved forward with handcuffs. What happened next occurred so quickly that later witnesses would give conflicting accounts. Mackenzie's hand flashed to his gun, drawing it with the speed of someone who'd practiced the motion 10,000 times. But Garrett was faster, his own weapon clearing its holster and firing in one smooth motion. The shot caught Mackenzie in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying. He collapsed to the street, clutching the wound, blood seeping between his fingers. You shot me, he gasped, more surprised than pained. You actually shot me. You drew on a judge and a sheriff, Garrett replied, his gun still trained on Mackenzie. What did you think would happen? He looked at one of the townspeople. Get Doc Morrison. The rest of you. He gestured to Mackenzie's remaining men, who'd frozen with their hands near their weapons. Drop your gun belts, now. The men complied slowly, clearly weighing their options and finding them lacking. With Mackenzie down and the law on the side of the judge, there was no profit in further violence. Doc Morrison arrived with his bag, a rotund man with gentle hands who knelt beside Mackenzie and began examining the wound. Through and through, he announced. Missed the bone. You'll live, Silas, though that arm's going to be sore for a while. I want him charged with attempted assault on a peace officer, Harrison said. Add that to the list. As Morrison worked and Garrett supervised the securing of prisoners, Thomas Hartwell approached Eliza. She'd been standing frozen through all of this, her mind struggling to process the sudden reversal of fortune. One moment she'd been a captive facing a forced marriage. The next, the man who tormented her was bleeding in the street and facing justice. Eliza, her father said quietly, I need to talk to you. I don't want to hear it. She started to turn away, but he caught her arm, gently this time, not with the bruising force he'd used before. Please, just listen. When she didn't pull away, he continued, I was wrong about everything, the gambling, the debts, selling you to Mackenzie. It was all wrong, and I knew it even as I was doing it. But I was scared. Scared of losing everything. Scared of ending up in prison, or worse. And I convinced myself that you'd be better off married to a rich man than destitute with me. You convinced yourself I was property you could trade away, Eliza said coldly. Yes, I did. And I was wrong. Thomas's voice cracked. Your mother would have been ashamed of me. Hell, I'm ashamed of me. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. Eliza looked at her father, really looked at him, for the first time in days. He'd aged years in the past week, new lines carved deep into his face, his hair grayer than she remembered. He looked defeated, broken, a man who'd gambled everything and lost. I can't forgive you, she said finally. Not now. Maybe not ever. You beat me. You tried to sell me. You hunted me across the territory like I was an escaped animal. Those aren't things that get wiped away with an apology. I know. But I don't hate you either. You're my father, and somewhere underneath the gambling and the drinking and the cowardice, There's still a part of the man who used to read me stories and teach me to ride. Maybe someday I'll be able to remember that man without all the rest of it getting in the way. But today isn't that day. Thomas nodded slowly, tears tracking through the dust on his face. What will you do now? I don't know. And that was the truth. She'd spent so much energy on escaping, on surviving, that she hadn't thought about what came after. Where would she go? How would she live? She had no money, no prospects, no family she could rely on. But I'll figure it out, without you, and without Mackenzie, and without any man who thinks he knows better than I do what I should do with my life. If you need money, I need nothing from you. Eliza turned away, done with this conversation, done with her father. She'd meant what she said. She didn't hate him. But she couldn't be near him either, couldn't rebuild any kind of relationship while the wounds he'd inflicted were still so fresh. Judge Harrison approached, having finished conferring with Sheriff Garrett. Miss Hartwell, I wonder if I might have a word. They moved away from the crowd, finding relative privacy near the boarding house steps where Mrs. Chen still stood watching. The older woman reached out and squeezed Eliza's hand as they passed, a gesture of solidarity and support that brought tears to Eliza's eyes. You've had a hell of a few days, Harrison said without preamble. And I'm sorry for your loss. Sheriff Garrett spoke highly of Jonah Reed. He was a good man, Eliza's voice caught. He died for me, died giving me a chance to escape, and I failed him. I got caught anyway. You survived. That's not failure. Harrison pulled a folded paper from his coat. Reed gave this to Garrett before you left town yesterday. He asked that if anything happened to him, it be given to you. Eliza took the paper with trembling hands. It was a single page, covered in neat handwriting that looked like it had been written in haste. Miss Hartwell, if you're reading this, I didn't make it. Don't waste time feeling guilty. Every choice I made was mine to make, and I made them with open eyes. You reminded me why I started drifting in the first place, looking for something worth fighting for. Turns out it was your right to be free. That's not a small thing. That's everything. There's a bank account in Denver under my name, account number 47823. Everything in it is yours now. Should be about $800, maybe a bit more. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to start over somewhere new. Find a place where nobody knows your story, where you can be whoever you want to be. And when you get there, live well, live free. That'll be the best revenge against everyone who tried to cage you. Jonah Reed. Eliza read it twice, tears blurring the words. $800. Jonah had given her not just her freedom, but the means to claim it, to build a life on her own terms. Even in death, he was protecting her, providing for her, making sure she had choices. He was a good man, she said again, her voice barely a whisper. The best I've known, Harrison agreed, and he'd want you to take that money and use it. Don't let his sacrifice be wasted. I won't. Eliza folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside her vest, close to her heart. What happens now, with Mackenzie and the others? They'll stand trial. Given what happened, I'd say Mackenzie's looking at 5 to 10 years in territorial prison, assuming the jury doesn't decide to be harsh. Your father's in a more complicated position. He didn't actively participate in the violence, but he enabled it. He'll likely face fines and possibly some jail time, though I'll argue for leniency given that he was protecting his own interests, however misguided. And me? You're free to go. There are no charges against you, no legal obligations keeping you here. Harrison paused. Though I'd recommend staying in town until the trial. Your testimony will be important, and it'll help ensure that Mackenzie faces appropriate consequences. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. The Territorial Circuit Court meets here monthly, and we're due for a session. 3 weeks. It seemed both impossibly long and somehow not enough time to process everything that had happened, everything she'd lost and gained in the span of a few days. I'll stay, she said finally. I owe Jonah that much. Seeing justice done for what they did to him. Harrison nodded approvingly. In the meantime, you'll need a place to stay. Mrs. Chen has already offered to extend you credit at the boarding house, and several townspeople have expressed willingness to help however they can. Seems your stand against Mackenzie resonated with folks who've been living under his thumb for years. That evening, after Morrison had patched up Mackenzie and Garrett had secured all the prisoners in his small jail, Eliza sat in her room at the boarding house and finally allowed herself to break down. She wept for Jonah. For the future they'd briefly glimpsed where she might have been safe, and he might have found peace. She wept for her mother, gone too soon to protect her daughter from the cruelties of men. She even wept for her father, trapped by his own weaknesses into betraying everything he should have held dear. But she also felt something growing alongside the grief, a fierce, bright determination. She'd survived. Against all odds, against men with money and guns and the law on their side, she'd survived. And now she had a chance to do more than just survive. She had a chance to thrive. The trial began 12 days later on a crisp October morning. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls and crowding outside the windows to listen. This wasn't just about Eliza and Mackenzie anymore. This had become something larger, a test of whether the law would protect the powerless or shield the powerful. Eliza testified first, walking the jury through everything that had happened from the moment her father announced her engagement to Mackenzie through the chase across the territory to Jonah's final stand. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. When Mackenzie's lawyer tried to paint her as a manipulative seductress who'd bewitched poor Jonah Reed into helping her escape, she met his accusations with calm denials and simple truth. Mr. Reed saw a woman being forced into marriage against her will, she said. He offered me a choice. That's all. No seduction, no manipulation, just one human being recognizing another's right to freedom. Mrs. Chen testified next, describing how Mackenzie and his men had broken down her door and terrorized her establishment while pursuing Eliza. Sheriff Garrett testified about the legal complexities of the case and how Mackenzie had overstepped his authority by organizing what amounted to a private militia to pursue his claim. The most damaging testimony came from one of Mackenzie's own hired guns, the man Jonah had wounded in the creek bed who'd survived but faced a long recovery. Bitter about being abandoned by Mackenzie once he was no longer useful, he testified that Mackenzie had ordered them to bring Eliza back by any means necessary, and had specifically said he didn't care if Reed ended up dead. He said Reed was just a drifter, nobody would miss him, the man testified. Said we could split an extra $100 if we made sure he didn't make it back to town. That testimony sealed Mackenzie's fate. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges: attempted kidnapping, unlawful pursuit, conspiracy to commit murder, and assault on a peace officer. Judge Harrison sentenced him to 15 years in territorial prison with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years. Thomas Hartwell was found guilty of conspiracy and child endangerment, but given a suspended sentence on the condition that he pay restitution to Eliza for her suffering and attend regular meetings with a temperance society to address his drinking. He'd also lost his house to creditors, his debts finally catching up with him without Mackenzie's marriage scheme to shield him. As the trial concluded and the prisoners were led away, Eliza felt something she'd been chasing since that morning on Main Street in Red Hollow finally settle into her chest. Peace. Not happiness. It was too soon for that, with Jonah's death still so fresh. But peace. The knowledge that justice had been served, that the men who'd tried to cage her were themselves now caged, that she was truly, legally, irrevocably free. The next day, Eliza visited the spot where Jonah had fallen. Sheriff Garrett had arranged for his burial in the Carson Springs Cemetery, a simple wooden cross marking the grave. She stood there for a long time, one hand resting on the sun-warmed wood, trying to find words adequate to what she felt. "Thank you," she said finally. "Thank you for seeing me as a person worth saving. Thank you for giving your life so I could have mine. I promise I'll make it count. I promise I'll live the kind of life that makes your sacrifice mean something." The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wild lupine. Somewhere a meadowlark sang, its song bright and defiant against the vast blue sky. And Eliza felt for just a moment like Jonah was there with her, not in body, but in spirit, approving of her resolve, proud of her strength. She left a wildflower on the grave, a blue columbine, the same color as his eyes, and walked back toward town, toward the boarding house where she'd pack her few belongings, toward the bank, where she'd withdraw Jonah's gift and begin planning her future. Toward the stage depot, where she'd buy a ticket to Denver or San Francisco or anywhere else she wanted to go. Toward freedom. Behind her, the wooden cross stood sentinel over Jonah Reed's final resting place, a testament to a man who'd given everything for a stranger's right to choose her own path. The inscription carved into the wood was simple but true. He died defending freedom. And ahead of her the world waited, vast and dangerous and full of possibility. Eliza Hartwell had been forged in fire and fear, tested beyond what any person should have to endure. But she'd survived. More than survived. She'd won. Now it was time to discover what she could become when no one was trying to tell her who she should be. Time to write her own story, on her own terms, with no one's hand but her own guiding the pen. The girl who'd been dragged down Main Street in Red Hollow no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who knew her own worth, who understood the price of freedom, and who would never ever let anyone take it away again. 3 days after the trial ended, Eliza stood in the Denver bank with Jonah's letter clutched in her hand, watching as the teller counted out $843 in bills and coins. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life, more than her father had probably earned in 5 years of sporadic work. The weight of it in the canvas bag the teller provided felt like possibility made tangible. "Will there be anything else, Miss Hartwell?" the teller asked, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and spectacles perched on his nose. "Yes, actually." Eliza had been thinking about this since leaving Carson Springs. "I'd like to open my own account, under my name only." The man smiled as if he understood the significance of those words. "Of course. I'll need some basic information from you." As she filled out the paperwork, Eliza realized this was the first official document she'd ever signed as an independent person. Not as her father's daughter, not as someone's intended bride, but simply as herself. Eliza Hartwell, citizen, account holder, woman with her own money and her own choices. She deposited $600, keeping the rest for immediate needs. When the teller handed her the account book with her name inscribed on the front, she had to blink back tears. "Thank you," she said softly, knowing the words weren't really for the teller, but for Jonah, wherever his spirit might be. Denver in October was a city transformed by autumn, aspens turning gold on the mountain slopes visible from every street, the air crisp and clean, a sense of energy and possibility that matched Eliza's mood. She found a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Margaret Sutton, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who asked few questions and seemed to appreciate Eliza's quiet demeanor. "I don't tolerate nonsense," Mrs. Sutton said, as she showed Eliza to a small but clean room on the second floor. "No men visitors after 8, no drinking, no loud disturbances. You pay on time, keep your space tidy, and we'll get along fine." "That sounds perfect," Eliza said, and meant it. After weeks of chaos and danger, the promise of rules and routine felt like a luxury. That first night in Denver, Eliza sat by her window and wrote a letter. Not to her father, she had nothing to say to him yet, maybe ever, but to Mrs. Chen in Carson Springs, thanking her for her kindness and her courage, to Sheriff Garrett, expressing gratitude for standing up when it mattered, and finally, painfully, to the memory of Jonah Reed, putting into words what she hadn't been able to say at his grave. She sealed the letters and set them aside for mailing in the morning. Then she pulled out the small knife Mrs. Chen had given her, the one she'd tried to use against Mackenzie, and carefully cleaned the blade before placing it in the drawer of her bedside table. She wouldn't need it for protection anymore, but she'd keep it as a reminder of the woman who'd armed her, of the courage it took to fight back, of the truth that sometimes survival meant being willing to draw blood. The next morning, Eliza set out to find work. She had money now, yes, but it wouldn't last forever, and she had no intention of being dependent on anyone or anything except her own capabilities. She walked the streets of Denver, noting the shops and businesses, assessing which might be willing to hire a young woman with limited experience but fierce determination. The answer came from an unexpected place. She'd stopped to admire the window display of a dressmaker's shop, beautiful gowns and fabrics she'd never hoped to touch, let alone wear, when the door opened and a woman emerged carrying a bundle of cloth scraps. "Are you interested in sewing?" the woman asked. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair pulled back severely and a measuring tape draped around her neck like jewelry. "I can sew," Eliza said. "My mother taught me before she died. Nothing fancy, but I can do basic mending and alterations. Can you work a treadle machine? I've never used one, but I'm a fast learner. The woman studied her for a long moment, and Eliza had the distinct impression she was being assessed for more than just sewing skills. My name is Catherine Winters. I own this shop, and my assistant just left to get married. I need someone who can handle basic alterations, help customers, and eventually learn to create more complex pieces. The pay is $3 a week, plus room in the apartment above the shop if you need it. Hours are long, work is hard, and I have no patience for laziness or excuses. I don't make excuses, Eliza said, meeting Catherine's eyes directly, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Good. When can you start? Today, if you need me. Catherine's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Then get in here. We have a wedding dress that needs hemming by tomorrow, and these hands, she held up her own, showing fingers cramped and swollen, aren't what they used to be. Working for Catherine Winters proved to be exactly what Eliza needed. The work was demanding. Her fingers ached from the constant needlework. Her back complained from hours bent over fabric. But it was honest labor that produced something beautiful. More than that, Catherine was a woman who'd built her own business in a world designed to keep women dependent and powerless. She was demanding but fair, critical but never cruel. And she had a way of knowing when Eliza needed encouragement versus when she needed to be pushed harder. You have good hands, Catherine said one evening, examining a particularly tricky alteration Eliza had completed. Steady. That's rare. Most girls your age are too impatient, rushing through the work. But you take your time. Do it right. Someone once told me that rushing leads to mistakes, Eliza said, remembering Jonah's careful, methodical movements as he taught her survival skills during their flight. And mistakes can cost you everything. Sounds like someone worth listening to. He was. Eliza kept her voice steady, though the grief still caught her sometimes like a fist to the chest. He died making sure I had a chance at the life I wanted. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the best way to honor someone like that is to live well, to take the chance they gave you and make something of it. Seems to me you're doing exactly that. Winter came early to Denver that year, snow falling in November and turning the city into something from a storybook. Eliza had never experienced a real winter. Red Hollow's climate was too dry for significant snow, and she found herself enchanted by the transformation. The way the world went quiet under a blanket of white, the crystalline beauty of frost on windows, the sharp, clean smell of snow-laden air. She'd been working for Catherine for 2 months when a letter arrived from Carson Springs. It was from Sheriff Garrett, written in his careful, blocky handwriting. Miss Hartwell, I hope this letter finds you well and settled. I wanted to inform you that Silas Mackenzie was transferred to Territorial Prison last week. He went quietly, which surprised me given his previous behavior. Your father has left Red Hollow. Word is he went north to Wyoming, hoping for a fresh start. Several people in town have asked about you, wanting to know if you're safe and well. I tell them you're thriving because I believe that's true. Mrs. Chen sends her regards in a package which I've included with this letter. She says you'll understand what it means. There's been some talk in town lately about women's suffrage and property rights. Funny how one young woman's stand against injustice can start people thinking about larger questions. You made a difference here, Miss Hartwell, more than you probably realize. Take care of yourself. Sheriff John Garrett. The package from Mrs. Chen contained 2 things. The cream-colored dress Eliza had been wearing when Jonah rescued her, carefully cleaned and mended, and a small journal with a note tucked inside. Write your own story. You've earned that right. Eliza held the dress for a long time, remembering the girl who'd worn it, terrified, desperate, with no hope beyond the slim chance a stranger might help her. That girl seemed like someone from another lifetime. She folded the dress carefully and placed it in her trunk, not to wear but to remember. Then she opened the journal and wrote on the first page. My name is Eliza Hartwell. I am 19 years old, and this is the story of how I became free. Christmas came, and Catherine closed the shop for 2 days. She invited Eliza to spend the holiday with her and her elderly mother in their small house on the edge of town. It was Eliza's first Christmas without her father, her first holiday completely alone in the world except for the connections she'd chosen to make. They cooked together, Catherine's mother teaching Eliza recipes she'd brought from back east, filling the house with warmth and laughter and the smell of baking bread. They exchanged small gifts. Catherine gave Eliza a beautiful sewing kit with silver scissors and mother-of-pearl buttons. Eliza gave Catherine a shawl she'd knitted in secret during her lunch breaks, using wool she'd saved up to buy. "You're family now," Catherine said simply as they sat by the fire that evening. "Blood doesn't always make family. Sometimes it's the people we choose, the ones who stand by us when everything else falls apart." "Thank you," Eliza said, her throat tight. "For everything. For giving me work, for teaching me, for treating you like a human being with value?" Catherine smiled sadly. "That shouldn't require thanks. That should be the minimum expectation. But I know the world doesn't work that way, especially not for women." "It's going to change," Eliza said with sudden fierceness. "It has to. There are too many of us who've survived too much to accept things staying the way they are." "You're right," Catherine agreed. "And when it changes, it'll be because of women like you, women who refused to accept what they were told was inevitable." The new year, 1879, arrived with fresh snow and fresh possibilities. Eliza had been promoted to senior seamstress, handling increasingly complex work and occasionally meeting directly with clients. She'd also begun attending meetings of the Denver Women's Association, a group dedicated to expanding women's rights and opportunities. She didn't speak much at first, content to listen and learn. But gradually, as she heard other women's stories of fathers who controlled them, husbands who owned them, laws that treated them as less than fully human, she began to find her voice. "We're told to be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity men allow us," she said at one meeting, surprising herself with her own boldness. "We're told that fighting for more is unladylike, unfeminine, ungrateful. But I've learned something. Freedom isn't given. It's taken. And sometimes taking it costs everything you have." She told them her story. Not all of it, not the most painful parts, but enough. The forced marriage, the escape, Jonah's sacrifice, the trial that had held powerful men accountable for once. Women cried. They applauded. They thanked her for her courage. "You're the reason we fight," one woman told her afterward, "because if you can stand up to men with guns and money and the law behind them, then we can stand up too." Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and blooming wildflowers. Eliza had been in Denver for 6 months, had built a life she could be proud of, steady work, genuine friendships, a sense of purpose. But something was still incomplete, a thread left dangling that needed to be tied off. She wrote to Sheriff Garrett asking about Jonah's grave. Was it being maintained? Did anyone visit? Garrett wrote back saying the Cemetery Association kept it tidy, and Mrs. Chen placed flowers there on the 1st of every month. But no family had ever come forward to claim him or mark the grave with anything more permanent than the simple wooden cross. Eliza made a decision. She went to a stonemason and commissioned a proper headstone, using a portion of the money Jonah had left her. It felt right using his gift to honor his memory properly. "What do you want it to say?" the stonemason asked. Eliza thought for a long moment. Then she said, "Jonah Reed, born 1848, died 1878. He gave his life defending freedom. His sacrifice will never be forgotten." The stone took 6 weeks to complete, carved from granite that would withstand centuries of Colorado weather. When it was finished, Eliza hired a wagon and made the journey back to Carson Springs, returning for the first time since the trial. The town had changed in subtle ways. New buildings had gone up. Different faces occupied the shops and saloons. But Mrs. Chen was still there, and she embraced Eliza like a daughter when she arrived. "Look at you," Mrs. Chen said, holding Eliza at arm's length to examine her. "You've bloomed, strong and sure. I'm proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you, without what you gave me. The knife, yes, but also the belief that I was worth fighting for." They went together to the cemetery, along with Sheriff Garrett and a few townspeople who remembered that September day when Jonah Reed had raised his rifle and changed everything. The stonemason's men set the headstone in place, and Eliza laid a bouquet of blue columbines at its base. "Thank you," she said softly, her hand resting on the cool granite. "Thank you for seeing me, for giving me a choice, for believing that one person's freedom was worth dying for. I won't waste what you gave me. I promise you that. That night, staying in her old room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, Eliza had a dream. In it, Jonah was standing in a meadow full of wildflowers, his face peaceful in the sunlight. He smiled at her, that quiet, certain smile she remembered, and tipped his hat. "You did good," he said, though she heard the words in her heart rather than her ears. "Rachel would have liked you. She would have been proud." "I miss you," Eliza said. "I wish you were here to see what you made possible." "I am here. Every time you stand up for yourself, every time you help another woman find her strength, every time you refuse to let anyone define your worth for you." He gestured to the meadow around them, the endless expanse of flowers and grass and sky. "This is freedom, Eliza. This is what I died for. And seeing you claim it makes every moment worth it." She woke with tears on her face, but peace in her heart. The grief would never fully leave her. Jonah's death had carved a space inside her that would always ache. But alongside that ache was gratitude, determination, and an unshakable sense of purpose. She returned to Denver and threw herself into her work and her activism with renewed energy. She began teaching sewing classes for young women at the association, giving them skills that could translate into independence. She wrote letters to territorial representatives, arguing for expanded women's rights. She told her story, over and over, to anyone who would listen, because she'd learned that stories had power, that one woman's refusal to submit could inspire 10 others to stand up. That courage was contagious. 2 years after that September morning in Red Hollow, Eliza received another letter, this time from an unexpected source. Her father's handwriting was shaky, the paper water-stained in places, but the words were clear. "Eliza, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect forgiveness or even acknowledgement. But I've been sober for 8 months now, and part of the process is making amends where possible. I can never undo what I did to you. I sold you, hurt you, hunted you like an animal. I prioritize my own cowardice over your well-being, and a good man died because of my choices. I live with that every day. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that you were right about everything. I stopped being your father when I decided you were something I could trade away. I hope you've found happiness. I hope you've built a life worth living. You deserve that and more. You always did. Thomas Hartwell." Eliza read the letter 3 times, emotions warring in her chest. Anger that he thought a letter could somehow balance the scales. Relief that he seemed to be taking responsibility for his actions. Grief for the father-daughter relationship they might have had if he'd been stronger, better, more willing to choose her over his own fear. She wrote back, finally. It took her a week to find the right words. "Father, I received your letter. I appreciate the apology, and I'm glad you're getting sober. That's important work, and I hope you stick with it. I can't forgive you yet, maybe someday, but not today. The wounds are still too fresh, and the scars run too deep. But I also can't carry the weight of hating you forever. It's too heavy, and I've got better things to do with my life. So here's what I can offer. I acknowledge your apology. I believe you're sincere, and I hope you find peace with yourself, the same way I've found peace with who I am and what I've survived. We probably won't have a relationship again. That door closed when you dragged me down Main Street, and I don't think it can be reopened. But I don't wish you ill. I just wish you elsewhere, away from me and my life. I've built something here that's mine, truly mine, and I won't risk it by letting you back in. I hope you understand. Take care of yourself. Eliza." She sealed the letter and sent it, and with it released the last hold her past had on her present. Her father was just a man now, no longer a specter haunting her choices or a weight dragging her down. Just a man who'd made terrible mistakes and was trying to atone, same as thousands of other flawed humans trying to navigate their way through life. Years passed. Eliza became a partner in Catherine's dress shop, her name on the sign above the door. Winters and Hartwell, fine dressmaking. She never married, though she had offers. The idea of belonging to anyone, of being someone's wife first and herself second, held no appeal. She had friendships, deep and meaningful connections with women who understood what it meant to forge your own path. She had her work, which brought satisfaction and purpose. She had her advocacy, writing articles for women's newspapers and speaking at meetings about the need for legal reform. She also had peace, real, lasting peace that came from knowing she'd fought for her freedom and won it, that she'd survived things that should have broken her and emerged stronger, that she'd turned her trauma into purpose, using her story to help other women see that resistance was possible, that they didn't have to accept what men told them was inevitable. On the 5th anniversary of Jonah Reed's death, Eliza made the journey back to Carson Springs one final time. She was 23 now, a woman fully formed and confident in her place in the world. The cemetery was quiet, the granite headstone she'd commissioned standing solid and enduring. She sat beside the grave for a long time, not speaking, just being present. Finally, she pulled out the journal Mrs. Chen had given her years ago, now nearly full of her own writing, stories, observations, arguments for women's rights, accounts of her life in Denver. "I finished it," she told Jonah's grave. "The story of how I became free. It starts with a girl being dragged to a forced marriage and ends with a woman who owns her own business, fights for other women's rights, and answers to no one but herself." She smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "It's a good story, a true story. And you're the hero of it, whether you'd want to be or not." She read aloud the final entry she'd written just that morning. "Freedom isn't a destination. It's a daily choice to stand up, speak up, and refuse to be diminished. Every day I choose it, I honor the man who gave his life to give me that choice. Every woman I help find her own strength, I'm paying forward the gift Jonah Reed gave me. I was a girl who had everything stolen from her: family, safety, agency, choice. I became a woman who took it all back and built something even better than what was taken. This is my story, but it's also the story of everyone who refuses to accept the cage they're offered, who fights for freedom even when it costs everything. We are legion, we are growing, and we will not be stopped." She closed the journal and placed it on the grave, leaving it there for a moment as if Jonah could somehow read it, could know how his sacrifice had rippled outward in ways neither of them could have imagined that September morning. Then she picked it up again, tucked it under her arm, and stood. "Thank you," she said one final time, "for everything. For seeing me as worth saving. For teaching me that freedom is worth fighting for. For being brave when I couldn't be. I'll carry you with me always. Not as a burden, but as a reminder of what's possible when someone chooses courage over comfort." She placed a fresh bouquet of columbines on the grave. They'd become her tradition, these flowers the color of his eyes, and turned to walk back toward town, toward the waiting stage that would carry her back to Denver, toward the life she'd built with her own hands and her own choices, toward the future that stretched out before her, vast and uncertain and completely, gloriously her own. Behind her, the headstone stood watch over Jonah Reed's final rest, testament to a man who'd given everything for a stranger's freedom. The inscription she'd chosen: "He gave his life defending freedom." His sacrifice will never be forgotten, was already weathering, the letters growing softer with each season's passage. But the truth it represented would endure far longer than any stone. Because freedom, once tasted, becomes an unquenchable thirst. And Eliza Hartwell had drunk deeply from that cup, swallowed it whole, made it part of her very being. She would spend the rest of her life helping other women drink from it too, showing them that cages could be broken, that chains could be cast off, that the word no, spoken with conviction, was more powerful than any weapon. The girl who'd been dragged toward a forced marriage no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who'd paid the price for her freedom in grief and blood and hard-won courage. A woman who would never, ever let anyone tell her who she should be or what she should accept. A woman who was, in every sense that mattered, finally and irrevocably free. The stage rolled out of Carson Springs as the sun climbed toward noon, carrying Eliza away from the past and toward the future. She didn't look back. There was no need. The past had taught her everything she needed to know about survival, about strength, about the price and the value of freedom. Now it was time to live, fully, fearlessly, on her own terms. Time to turn survival into thriving, trauma into triumph, a girl's desperate escape into a woman's lasting legacy. And somewhere, in whatever place brave souls go when their work on earth is done, Jonah Reed smiled. Because the girl he'd saved had done exactly what he'd hoped she would do. She'd lived well, She'd lived free. And in doing so, she'd made his sacrifice mean everything.